I never really thought much about the locks on Grandpa's door. They'd been there as long as I could remember. Brass brackets fitted neatly into the doorframe, old polished skeleton keys resting on a small dish by Dad's spot at the dinner table. To me, it was just part of our house, like the faded wallpaper in the hallway or the humming radiator that never quite stopped rattling in winter. Every evening after dinner, Grandpa would fold his napkin carefully, place it beside his plate, and stand with a soft sigh. He always thanked Mom for the meal, patted Dad's shoulder as he passed, then paused at my chair to give a gentle nod and a small smile. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and for a moment, he looked younger than his thin spotted hands suggested. Then he'd shuffle down the short hallway to his room, slippers scuffing the hardwood with a rhythm I could hear even over the ticking kitchen clock. Dad would stand and follow him, keys jingling in his palm. Once Grandpa stepped inside, Dad would close the door and turn the lock twice until it clicked solid. Sometimes he'd test the handle after, giving it a quick shake to make sure it held firm. Then he'd sigh, tuck the keys back into his pocket, and we'd carry on cleaning up the plates and wiping down the counters. No one talked about it. I never thought to ask why Grandpa's door needed a lock from the outside, and they never offered an explanation. As a kid, I assumed it was a safety thing, like those plastic outlet covers or cabinet locks to keep toddlers away from bleach bottles. Grandpa was frail after all. He'd been old for as long as I'd been alive. In the mornings, he sat by the sliding door with his library books, reading with thick glasses perched halfway down his nose, one hand stroking the cat curled in his lap. In the afternoons, he walked slow laps around the little garden beds, pulling up weeds or patting tomato cages to check their stability. At school, my friends asked why Grandpa didn't live in a care home. I shrugged and said he didn't need one. When they pushed further, asking about the locks, heat rose in my cheeks. I laughed it off, mumbling that it was just a family thing. Eventually, they stopped asking. For me, it was normal. Grandpa had dinner with us, Grandpa went to bed, Dad locked his door. The world stayed simple because I never gave myself a reason to question it. Dinner was chicken stew that night, thick with potatoes and onions. Grandpa always ate slow, taking tiny spoonfuls and chewing each bite carefully. He barely touched his roll, tearing it into small pieces and piling them neatly on the rim of his plate. Halfway through the meal, he paused and pressed a napkin to his mouth. His shoulders shook with a quiet cough, deeper than his usual shallow clearing of the throat. When he pulled the napkin away, I saw the dark red stain blooming across the folded cotton. It wasn't much, just a faint splash, but it sat heavy in my chest. He frowned down at it for a moment, then folded the napkin over again so only clean white showed. Mom and Dad both saw it. I watched them exchange a glance across the table, a silent conversation passing between them in the tightening of their eyes and the set of their jaws. Neither said a word. Dad reached for the salt shaker. Mom asked if anyone wanted more bread. I kept eating, though my stomach felt tight and hollow. Grandpa's hands trembled faintly as he lifted his spoon. He still smiled at me when our eyes met, the corners of his mouth pulling up in that familiar, tired way. For a moment, I wondered if he was scared, if he ever worried about getting old, or if he'd lived so long that death just felt like another room he'd eventually walk into. After dinner, he stood carefully and pushed his chair back onto the table. He thanked Mom for the stew, patted Dad's shoulder, and gave me his usual small nod. There was an extra pause before he turned away, a flicker of something clouding his gaze. Then he shuffled down the hallway to his room. Dad followed, keys jingling quietly in his pocket. I sat there, staring at my half-empty bowl, listening for the click of the lock. It echoed faintly through the house, followed by Dad's slow footsteps returning to the kitchen. He started running the tap, rinsing dishes as if nothing had happened. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. The sound of Grandpa's cough kept looping in my head. I'd always thought of him as old but unbreakable, like a statue weathered smooth by decades of rain. Now he seemed small, frail in a way that scared me. What if he needed help in the middle of the night? What if he fell or couldn't breathe? The idea of him locked alone behind that heavy door made my chest ache. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't actually know why we locked him in. I never cared enough to ask, but if something happened to him in there and I did nothing, I wasn't sure I could live with that. I lay awake long after the house went quiet. The glow from my phone screen faded as the battery died, leaving me in the faint orange wash of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of my alarm clock and the gentle creaks of wood settling into the cool air. My chest felt tight with worry, every shallow breath scraping against it. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood, the carpet cool against my feet. The hallway felt colder than my room. Shadows lay in thick pools along the skirting boards, and the faint hum of the fridge drifted down from the kitchen. I walked slowly, placing each foot with care so the floorboards wouldn't complain under my weight. Grandpa's door sat at the end, painted the same pale yellow as the rest of the walls, the heavy brass locks shining dully in the low light. I pressed my ear against the wood. For a moment, there was nothing but silence and my own heart beating fast in my chest. Then I heard it, a soft humming, quiet and tuneless. His voice sounded thin, wavering at the ends of each note, but steady enough to recognize as his. After a while, the humming faded into whispers. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence of speech, rising and falling in the dark. It almost sounded like a prayer, though the rhythm felt wrong, unfamiliar. My hand drifted to the doorknob. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal and turned it gently. It rattled under my grip, locked firm. I held it there for a moment, feeling the solid resistance between us. Something heavy settled in my chest, a quiet certainty that I needed to know what was behind this door. I let go and stepped back, pressing my hand to the wall to steady myself. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would find the spare key. The next morning, I waited until Mom left for the grocery store and Dad headed out to mow the lawn. His footsteps crunched across the gravel drive and the whir of the mower drifted faintly through the kitchen window. My hands trembled as I wiped down the breakfast plates, trying to keep busy while my thoughts spun circles in my chest. When the mower engine roared to life outside, I slipped down the hallway to my parents' room. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and for a moment, I froze, listening for any sign Dad had heard. But the steady drone of the mower continued. Their room smelt faintly of old perfume and clean linen. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting bright stripes across the carpet. I moved quickly to Dad's dresser and pulled open the top drawer. Socks and folded handkerchiefs lay stacked in neat rows. I ran my fingers along the back until they hit a thin wooden panel. Pressing down gently, I felt it shift under my touch. A false bottom. My heart thudded against my ribs as I lifted it away. There, resting in the hollow space, lay an old brass skeleton key. Its edges were worn smooth, the teeth darkened with age. I held it in my palm, feeling its cold weight. The urge to put it back nearly overwhelmed me. My chest felt tight with guilt, as if taking it would snap some invisible thread holding the house together. But the memory of Grandpa's cough pressed against my mind. The way his shoulders shook with the force of it, the way he smiled at me despite the blood on his napkin. I thought about how he always paused in my chair after dinner to give me that slight nod, as if to say he saw me, even when no one else did. I thought about how his hands trembled when he held his spoon, and how his feet dragged a little more each day as he walked down the hall. He was getting weaker, and I couldn't stand the thought of him trapped behind that door, sick or scared or in pain, with no one there to help him. Even if there was some reason he had to be locked in, he still deserved someone who cared enough to check on him. I tucked the key into my pocket, lowered the false bottom back into place, and closed the drawer. The mower's hum continued outside, unbroken. I stepped into the hallway, the feel of the key burning cold against my thigh through the denim. That evening, at dinner, Grandpa barely touched his food. He sat hunched in his chair, eyes shadowed and distant. When Mom offered him a second helping, he shook his head with a tired smile. The silence at the table felt thick enough to choke on. Finally, Grandpa set down his fork and looked around at each of us, his gaze settling on me last. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for taking care of me all these years." Mom reached over and placed a hand on his, squeezing it gently. Dad gave him a small nod, his mouth tight, eyes fixed on his plate. Neither of them spoke. Their calm acceptance made my stomach twist with confusion and dread. After dinner, Grandpa stood and excused himself. Dad followed him down the hall, keys jingling in his hand. I sat frozen, listening for the quiet click of the lock as Grandpa's door closed for the night. When darkness fell and the house settled into its nighttime hush, I lay awake. The brass key lay under my pillow, its weight dragging at my thoughts. My heart thudded so loud I could feel it pulsing against the mattress. Worry coiled tighter with each passing hour. I couldn't shake the image of Grandpa's trembling smile and dark, tired eyes. I told myself I was doing this for him, because he deserved more than to be left alone behind a locked door he couldn't open. Near midnight, I slid out of bed, careful to avoid the groaning floorboard beside the dresser. The house lay in silent darkness, thick with the soft hum of appliances and the occasional tick of cooling pipes. I held the brass key tight in my fist as I crept down the hallway, the carpet rough under my bare feet. Grandpa's door loomed ahead, pale yellow in the dim light spilling from the cracked bedroom door behind me. My pulse hammered against my ribs, each thud echoing louder in my ears as I slipped the key into the lock. The metal teeth caught and resisted for a moment before turning with a soft click. I paused, breath caught in my throat, listening for any sound from inside. Nothing moved beyond the door. I eased it open just wide enough to slip through, pressed my back against the wood once it closed behind me. The room smelled of lavender powder and old mothballs, a dry sweetness undercut with something damp and metallic that set my teeth on edge. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting pale silver bars across the carpet and the edge of Grandpa's bed. He sat upright, propped against the headboard, hands folded neatly in his lap. His chin rested against his chest, eyes closed. For a moment, I thought he might be asleep, but his chest rose and fell in slow, labored breaths. Each inhale rattled in his throat before shuddering out into the quiet room. "Grandpa?" I whispered. My voice trembled in the stale air, curling around the shadows clinging to the corners of the room. His eyes opened. At first, I thought the moonlight was playing tricks on me, but as his eyes adjusted, I saw the pale, cloudy film covering his pupils, a faint milky sheen that caught in the dim light. His gaze turned toward me, unfocused but aware. He didn't blink. His mouth opened slightly, lips cracking at the corners as he spoke. "You shouldn't have come in," he rasped. His voice scraped through the quiet, thin and shaking with something deeper than weakness. "I don't have much time left to keep it down." A tremor ran through his folded hands. The room felt smaller with each shallow breath I took, the air pressing in against my chest until I couldn't draw it fully. Outside the window, the wind rattled the warped glass, the sound sharp and sudden in the thick silence. I wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, but no words came out. Only the sound of his ragged breathing filled the room, and the faint quiver of moonlight trembling across the carpet between us. Grandpa's breathing hitched. His chest expanded in shallow, ragged gasps that caught against something deeper inside him. His folded hands twitched against his lap before curling into trembling fists. Slowly, his head tipped back against the headboard, eyes rolling until only the cloudy white showed beneath fluttering lids. Then, his back arched. At first, he looked as if he was stretching to relieve a cramp, but his spine kept bending, vertebrae pushing out under his thin cotton shirt until each bone jutted sharply against the fabric. His jaw sagged open, trembling with effort. A quiet pop echoed from his chin. Another crack deeper in his throat followed, wet and sharp, and his mouth dropped wider than it should have been able to. The skin at the corner split open in thin, tearing lines, blood welling up dark and quick. A wet choking sound poured from his chest, vibrating through the bed frame into the stillness of the room. Then, something slid out from between his parted lips, forcing his mouth open even wider with a slick, sucking noise. Pale flesh pushed forward in twisting folds, slick with mucus and threaded with thin blue veins. It uncurled across his chin and draped down his chest before lifting into the air, writhing and pulsing as if searching for something in the dark. My body jolted into action before I could think. I turned and lunged for the door, reaching for the knob with shaking hands. Something slapped wet and heavy around my ankles. The force pulled my feet from under me, slamming my knees onto the thin carpet. Pain shot up my thighs as the fleshy tendrils tightened, its damp surface clinging to my bare skin with a sucking grip. The touch burned cold at first, then grew hot, searing against my calves as it began to drag me back across the room. Grandpa's head hung limp, mouth gaping wide as more of the pale, veined flesh poured from his throat, coiling and pulsing in the moonlight. His eyes fluttered open, tears mixing with blood as they streamed down his cheeks. The ropes of flesh vibrated with each ragged breath he took, making his voice tremble when he spoke. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words came out wet and garbled around the mass, forcing his jaw open. Each syllable gurgled through the slick mess spilling from his mouth. "I tried to keep it fed quietly. I tried so hard." His sobs shuddered through the pulsing tendrils as they dragged me closer to the bed. the smell of blood and rotting meat filling my nose with each ragged breath I drew. The fleshy tendrils coiled tighter around my ankles, dragging me inch by inch across the carpet. My fingernails tore at the rug's threads, leaving faint bloody crescents behind. Grandpa's mouth kept stretching, jaw trembling under the mass, forcing it wider. Slick ropes of pale tissue pulsing and curling through the air. The door slammed open behind me so hard it cracked against the wall. Dad charged into the room, his face pale with terror, eyes wide and wild. He gripped an old iron crowbar in both hands, rust flaking off the shaft where his fingers tightened around it. Without hesitation, he swung the bar down into the nearest coil, wrapping my leg. The impact made the tendril shudder, jerking away with a wet, tearing sound that sprayed my calf with dark mucus. Grandpa's mouth let out a strangled groan as the mass recoiled into his throat for a moment before surging back out twice as thick. More folds of veined flesh spilled down his chest and coiled along the floor, groping blindly across the carpet. Dad swung again, this time striking one of the thicker ropes still wrapped around my ankles. The force knocked my leg free, pain searing at my shins where the bar clipped bone. I gasped and tried to crawl backward, tears blurring my vision. The fleshy coils writhed and twisted toward me again, seeking my bare skin with wet sucking sounds. "Get back!" Dad shouted, voice cracking with panic. He raised the crowbar again, but paused, eyes darting from me to Grandpa. His breath came in short, ragged bursts as he watched the thing pulsing from Grandpa's mouth. For a moment, hope flashed in his eyes, as if he believed he could still save him. Then, Grandpa's eyes rolled back, his chest convulsed, a deep rattle shaking through his ribs. The tendrils doubled their frantic movements, whipping and slapping against the walls and floor. One struck Dad across the cheek, leaving a smear of blood and mucus down to his jawline. He stumbled back, chest heaving, the crowbar trembling in his grip. "Dad," I sobbed, reaching out to him. My voice felt thin and useless in the chaos. His gaze flicked to me, eyes brimming with something worse than fear. Grief. Finality. Slowly, he raised the crowbar higher, gripping it until his knuckles bleached white. With a strangled cry, he brought it down hard onto Grandpa's skull. The sound was wet and sharp, a dull crack that echoed through the small room. Grandpa's head snapped sideways against the headboard, his jaw still forced wide around the pulsing mass. Another blow, another. Bone crunched under iron. Blood splattered across the pillows and wall, mixing with the dark mucus oozing from his mouth. The tendrils spasmed, flailing in wild arcs before collapsing into limp coils on the bed. Dad stepped back, chest heaving, crowbar dripping with blood and mucus. Grandpa slumped forward, the thing in his throat retreating in quivering jerks until it vanished into his mouth. His jaw sagged open one last time before closing with a quiet, wet snap. Mom appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim hall light. She clutched the heavy ceramic bowl against her chest, its rim caked with dark herbs and strips of raw meat glistening in thick, oily liquid. Her lips moved in a trembling whisper, chanting words that sounded rough and broken in her throat. She looked from Grandpa's body to Dad, then to me, crouched on the floor, trembling and streaked with blood. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she stepped closer, the bowl shaking in her hands. Dad lowered the crowbar, staring at the broken body slumped against the headboard. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion and grief. Then, he turned to me, His eyes were red, rimmed with tears, empty of anything except the hollow of defeat. Mom fell silent, her chant dying in her throat. She set the bowl down at her feet, never taking her eyes off Grandpa. There was a sadness there, deep and trembling. But something about it felt wrong. The sorrow in her gaze seemed to stretch beyond the grief for a lost father. There was a tremor of fear behind the tears, a knowledge of what came next that twisted her grief into something sharper. Dad knelt beside me and pulled me into his chest, his arms trembling around my shoulders. I pressed my face into his shirt, breathing in sweat and iron and old earth. Over his shoulder, Mom just stood there, staring at the body on the bed, her tears dripping into the bowl of blood and raw meat at her feet. Evening settled over the kitchen, brushing the old lace curtains with deep gold and violet. The sun dipped below the neighbors' rooftops, leaving strips of fading light across the tile floors. I sat at the table, fingers curled around a mug of lukewarm tea I hadn't touched. The chair to my right sat empty, Grandpa's cushion flattened where he used to sit each night with his chipped ceramic bowl of stew, humming under his breath while he waited for Dad to pass the bread. Dad sat across from me, elbows resting on the table, face buried in his hands. His hair stuck out in damp clumps, still streaked with flecks of dried blood he hadn't managed to wash away. Mom moved around the kitchen in silence, rinsing dishes no one had used and wiping down spotless counters again and again. Finally, Dad raised his head. His eyes were rimmed red, sunken with exhaustion. He tried to smile, but the corners of his mouth only twitched before sagging again. "We should have told you," he said softly. "This wasn't fair to you." I stared at him, words caught behind the tightness in my throat. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but didn't fall. I felt scraped out inside, hollow and trembling. "Your grandfather, he was host to something," Dad continued, voice rough. "Long before you were born, before I was born, locking him in at night was the only way to keep it contained. It feeds while he sleeps, but it doesn't spread. That's why we—" He paused mid-sentence, frowning at the clock above the sink. The number glowed 7:59 in steady green digits. His shoulders slumped further as he pushed back from the table, chair scraping across the faded vinyl floor. He stood and looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers as if testing their strength. Mom moved to his side, pressing a kiss to his temple. She picked up the heavy brass key from the counter, holding it in both hands as if it weighed more than its size allowed. "I'll bring you breakfast," she whispered. Dad didn't reply. He walked down the hall, footsteps slow and dragging. Mom followed him, pausing at the kitchen doorway to look back at me. Her eyes were glassy with tears that didn't spill over. There was a grief there, deep and raw, but beneath it flickered something colder, an old acceptance that made my skin tighten with dread. She closed Grandpa's door behind him. I heard the lock turn with a solid, final click. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair beside me. The cushion still held the faint indent of Grandpa's shape. The scent of his lavender powder lingered on the fabric, blending with the aroma of old wood and the evening air. My chest ached with something I couldn't name. Fear, loss, a knowledge that felt older than my 17 years. I realized I didn't need them to explain. The truth lay quiet in the pit of my stomach, heavy and certain. This thing, whatever it is, didn't die with Grandpa. It passed along, settling itself into the next willing body, the next family member. I wondered how long I had, until it was my turn. I was finishing up my afternoon shift at the gas station when the power flickered once, twice, then died for good. The store went silent except for the hum of the old drink fridge winding down, and outside, the entire street had begun melting into darkness. For a moment, I stood behind the cash register, staring at the dead monitors, thinking about how I'd be leaving this place for college in 2 weeks, thinking about how small and heavy it felt to still be here. By the time I logged up and stepped into the fading sunlight, candlelight was already blooming in windows up and down Main Street. Tiny flames flickered behind lace curtains and lined porch railings, glowing against the dark like cautious eyes. That was just what people did here whenever the power failed. It didn't matter if it was a 2-minute brownout or an overnight storm outage. Candles came out fast. No one ever explained it to me in words that made sense. I just grew up knowing that when the lights went out, you lit a candle for them. No one really said who they were. No one wanted to. I've always gone along with it. Habit mostly. Maybe a bit of fear too, if I'm honest. But nothing deeper than that. Grandma was the believer. She would hum under her breath, low and tuneless, as she lit each wick in the living room. Her hands would tremble as she moved from candle to candle, whispering prayers I never fully understood. The prayers meant to keep us safe, she said. I used to watch her and wonder if she really believed in what she was doing, or if believing was just easier than asking questions no one had answers for. All I knew was that every window in our street would glow by the time the first hour of the blackout passed. Every porch would have a candle burning, and every family would stay inside, quiet, waiting for the power to come back on. I jogged the short distance home, my trainers slapping the pavement in the hush. There was just enough daylight left to make it home. Without the streetlights, the neighborhood felt swallowed by the sky, leaving only small islands of flickering light in the windows. Every porch had its candle lanterns burning. Some families set out mason jars with tea lights lining their walkways, flames bending and trembling in the spring wind. It was beautiful in a way, if I didn't think too hard about why we did it. No one was outside. Not even porch smokers or gossiping neighbors leaning on rails. Windows were curtained tightly. The only movement came from the restless flames themselves, stretching shadows across gardens and driveways. When I was little, I used to think the candles made the town look warm and alive. Grandma would tell me stories about how her own mother lit them every blackout, whispering that they kept the watchers calm. At school, teachers never spoke about it. My friends and I would joke that the candles were just a hillbilly blackout tradition, something to make us feel special when power companies ignored us. But I still lit them. We all did. Even the new families who moved here eventually fell in line. No one wanted to be the only house dark during an outage. Our house sat at the end of Sycamore Lane, a sagging one-story with peeling blue trim. It was smaller than most, with 2 thin porch posts wrapped in chipped plastic ivy. Grandma always said she liked being at the edge, away from the busier parts of town. Fewer eyes watching her every move, she'd whisper with a smile. Though I never understood what that meant. I pushed through the gate and up the front steps two at a time, the wood creaking under my weight. My fingers shook as I thumbed the keys from my pocket. I wanted to see a silhouette in the window, rocking slowly in a chair, candlelight pooling around her lined face as she mouthed prayers into the quiet. That was how it always was. Even when the power returned, she let the candles burn down to wax puddles before blowing them out, just to be sure. Inside, the living room smelled of lavender wax and melted paraffin. Dozens of tea lights flickered along the windowsill, and the old bookshelves crammed with worn cookbooks and yarn baskets. But there was no humming to greet me, no whispered psalms or half-forgotten lullabies weaving through the candlelit shadows. Grandma was slumped in a rocking chair, head leaning against the shoulder. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. The glow of the candles lit her face from below, deepening every wrinkle into something hollow and waxen. Her chest rose and fell in shadow, uneven breath that rattled in her throat. "Grandma?" My voice cracked as I crossed the room, dropping my bag by the door. I crouched beside her, gripping her wrist. Her skin felt cold and damp. She didn't blink. Her breathing fluttered like a candle about to go out. For a long moment, I knelt there, listening to the ticking of the wind-up clock on the bookshelf and the soft hiss of candle wicks burning low. Outside, the street was silent, holding its breath under the blackout sky. Emergency services never came out during a blackout. Whether it was due to tradition or a logistical reason, I never knew. But what I did know was it was useless to try. My chest tightened. I stood and moved to the candle shelf, pulling down the box of fresh votives. If Grandma couldn't finish them tonight, I would. I didn't know what else to do. All I could think was, keep them burning, keep her safe, keep whatever waited in the dark from thinking our house was empty. I moved through the house with the box of votives balanced against my hip, placing candles in every room. The kitchen counters were already lined with wax-stained saucers from past blackouts, each ready to cradle a flickering flame. I lit one beside the sink, another on the breakfast table near Grandma's half-finished crossword. Her pencil rested diagonally across the grid, its eraser worn down to metal. In the hallway, I set a stubby pillar candle atop the shoe cabinet, its orange glow stretching toward the bedrooms. Shadows danced across the peeling floral wallpaper, blooming and shrinking in the shifting light. Each flicker made me flinch. I kept listening for Grandma's voice, hoping she would call out to me, ask what I was doing, or tell me I missed the spot. But the house stayed silent, apart from the quiet hiss of wicks catching fire. At the bathroom door, I paused to check her breathing again. From the hallway, I could see her chest rising and falling, slow and uneven. Relief thinned the tightness in my throat for a moment. I whispered a quick prayer, words she used to say when I was scared of thunder. Keep her safe, keep them away, bring back the sun. The last candle sat on the living room window ledge. I knelt and held the match to the wick. For a moment, the flame flared bright, illuminating the frost-webbed glass. My reflection glowed there, skin pale under the candle's bloom. I moved to blow out the match, but something beyond the window caught my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the yard where the candlelight faded into darkness. She wore a cotton house dress with a hem that brushed her ankles, and her hair was pinned back neatly from her face. The woman's shoulders were straight, her head tilted slightly to one side. Even from where I knelt, I could see her smile. My heart thumped so loud I couldn't breathe. It was Grandma. She raised one hand and curled her fingers in a gentle beckoning motion, inviting me out into the darkness beyond the candles. My hands fumbled for my phone as I backed away from the window. Emergency services were no help, but maybe someone from the town knew what to do. The screen lit up blue and empty. No bars, no emergency signal. I tried again, pressing the numbers harder, as if force alone could push the call through. Each failed attempt made my chest tighten until I felt I couldn't draw breath at all. Come on, come on. My voice shook in the quiet room. The only answer was the low hiss of the candles burning along the shelf. I shoved the phone into my pocket and turned to check on Grandma. For a moment, I thought she was still there in a chair. The shadows clung thick around the cushions, curling into shapes I almost recognized. I stepped closer, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The chair was empty. The front door stood open, letting in a chill breeze that carried the faint scent of damp earth and blown-out matches. The candles by the entry had been extinguished, wax pooling around blackened wicks. Their smoke coiled upward in thin grey ribbons that faded into the dark. "Grandma?" My voice cracked. I rushed to the doorway and peered outside. The street stretched silent under the blackout sky, only lit by the flickering candles in windows and porches. I stepped onto the porch boards, clutching the frame to keep my knees from buckling. "Grandma!" I shouted again, louder this time. My voice echoed off quiet houses, then fell flat. At the far end of the street, shadows flickered at the edge of the driveway. They were tall, thin shapes standing just beyond the candlelight's reach. They didn't move, they didn't speak, but I could feel their attention pressing against my skin, pricking cold and sharp as sleet. Lights glowed behind curtained windows. I saw a neighbor across the street pull back a lace curtain with 2 fingers, her eyes wide and round in the dimness. Our gazes met. She shook her head once in a quick, desperate motion before letting the curtain fall back into place. Another window brightened as someone flicked on a flashlight, only to click it off immediately, leaving candle flames to flutter alone. "Please," I whispered, though I didn't know who I was asking. I remembered Grandma's old warning, the one she always made me repeat before bed during storms when the lights flickered. Never go outside during a blackout without a single lit candle. They can't see you if you carry the light. My hands were empty. I was standing barefoot in the dark, nothing but silent watchers between me and the rest of the world. I stepped off the porch, the chill grass flattening under my bare feet. My eyes darted across the yard, scanning for any sign of her. The shadows at the end of the street still stood silent and watchful. I forced myself to look away, focusing instead on the ground directly before me. Halfway to the garden beds, a faint glimmer caught my eye. I moved closer, heart thudding against my ribs so hard it hurt. There, nestled among the dandelion stalks and damp earth, lay Grandma's old brass candle holder. Its curved handle rested on a patch of flattened grass, wax pooled and solidifying around the wick. I crouched and touched it with trembling fingers. The wax was still warm. The scent of lavender clung to it, soft and sweet in the cold air. Tears prickled in my eyes. She never let this candle go out, not once in all my years living with her, constantly replacing it when it got low. She kept it by a chair every night, even when there was no blackout, flame flickering against the dark until dawn came back. I clutched the holder to my chest and stood, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. The street felt wrong in its silence. My gaze drifted past the fences and rooftops toward the tree line at the far edge of town. Beyond the open fields, in the dense clutch of old pines and bare-boned oaks, hundreds of tiny lights flickered between the trunks. Pinpricks of gold hovered in the dark, steady and silent. They weren't fireflies. The lights didn't bob or bounce. Each remained fixed at a different height, some low to the ground, others near the canopy, spread among the trees in careful, unnatural patterns. My breath caught. I could almost see shapes holding them. Figures with edges blurred by shadow, each carrying a pale, unwavering flame inside them. They stood in silent rows, facing my direction, though I couldn't see their eyes. The sight made my skin tighten until I felt I might crawl out of it just to escape the feeling. I realized then why it never made sense before. Growing up, I always thought the candles were for us. They kept bad things away and kept our homes safe until the power returned. That's what everyone said, even if they never explained how. But no one ever talked about the woods. No one ever spoke about what the candles were keeping lit for. It was a gap I never noticed because I didn't want to, because the thought that the lights weren't barriers but invitations felt too heavy to hold as a child. So I never asked. None of us did. A memory rose sharp and sudden. Grandma's voice, low and quivering, as she cleaned and trimmed the old wicks. They need light to find their way home. If we don't give it to them, they'll look for another glow to follow. I pressed a hand over my mouth, fighting the nausea climbing up my throat. The candles weren't meant to keep spirits away. They were to guide them back to wherever they came from, to keep them moving past us. Without the light showing them the path, they'd find another source, another warmth, another living glow to carry them through the dark. And tonight, the only other light left was me. My breath rasped in my throat, shallow and quick, but I forced myself to move slowly. Rushing would only make the candle flicker harder. With how close I was getting, if it went out, I knew I would not be able to relight it in time. The closer I drew to the tree line, the colder the air became. My bare arms prickled with goosebumps, and sweat cooled against the back of my neck. The pine trunks rose tall and silent before me, their branches clawing at the dark sky. Between them, the flickering lights spread deeper, forming rows and clusters among the shadows. I paused at the edge of the woods, the scent of damp needles and rotting leaves curling into my nose. The candle trembled in the faint breeze, its small flame bending toward the trees. I moved forward in a single step, then another, careful to keep the holder level. My hands ached from gripping it so tightly, but I didn't dare loosen my hold. As I crossed into the tree line, the light shifted. They began to move, drifting out from behind trunks and thickets. Figures emerged with them, pale shapes that blurred at their edges. The faces were smooth and empty, with thin, white skins stretched over blank hollows. Each one emitted a small light from their chest, maybe a representation of their soul made manifest, looking like a flame standing tall without so much as a tremor. Each only had one light in them. If I had come with more candles for safety, they didn't make a sound, no footfalls, no breaths, just the soft hiss of wax burning and the faint crackle of my own candle as I passed them. I had to walk slowly, measuring each step to keep from stubbing over roots or fallen branches. The candle's flame pulled my attention, forcing me to watch it more than my path. The ground was littered with pine needles and twigs, each threatening to shift under my weight. Every time the wick guttered from a trembling step, my chest clenched so hard I felt I might vomit from fear alone. The pale figures pressed closer, creating a narrow corridor of flickering gold. The heads turned to follow my movement, though they had no eyes to see me with. My scalp prickled with constant sweat as I felt their attention tighten around me, a silent, suffocating curiosity. They parted ahead, revealing a small clearing deep among the trees. In the center stood my grandmother. A thin cotton nightgown billowed faintly around her ankles in the breeze, though her hair and arms remained utterly still. She stared forward, eyes glazed and unblinking, mouth slack, her hands hung at her sides, empty. A shape moved behind her, taller than the others, dark enough to drink in every shred of candlelight nearby. Its form shifted with each step, thin and bony. Its hand emerged from the gloom, long and skeletal, skin stretched taut over jutting knuckles. It extended its hand toward mine, palm up, waiting. The meaning pressed into my chest with a weight of stone. It wanted my candle, my light in exchange for Grandma's return. A soul for a soul, or at least what it thought was a soul. I tightened my grip until my knuckles burned, unable to breathe past the cold swell in my throat. Even though I knew I wasn't giving it my soul, I was still handing over my only light. Without the flame, would I find my way back through these trees? Without it, would I become just another flickering shape among the silent congregation? My grip loosened around the brass holder. The flame wavered once before steadying again, bright and calm against the dark. The skeletal hand remained outstretched, fingers curling in silent invitation. My chest felt tight enough to crack my ribs apart. Every instinct screamed to turn and run, but I forced myself to take a trembling step forward. I extended the candle. The figure's hand closed around the holder, skin crackling with a sound like frozen branches breaking. The instant my fingers let go, the darkness surged inward. Shadows rushed past my face, cold and sharp, scraping against my skin as if testing its warmth. I lunged for Grandma, my fingers wrapped around her thin wrist, gripping bone under soft skin. She didn't move at first. For a single crushing moment, I thought I had traded a soul for nothing, that I'd lost both of us to the woods forever. Then her arm twitched in my grasp, her chest rose in a sudden ragged breath. Her eyes flickered with awareness, confusion clouding her gaze as she turned her head to look at me. The shadows shrieked without sound, rushing forward with a sudden, violent hunger. Without a candle, I no longer blended in, and just like an immune system, they went straight for me, as if I were an invader. They clawed at my shoulders, scraping across my back, ripping the thin fabric of my shirt with ice-cold fingers. I tightened my hold on Grandma and pulled her forward, forcing her feet to move across the pine-littered ground. We stumbled between the pale watchers, weaving through their silent ranks. Branches snagged at my hair and whipped across my face, scratching skin raw. Roots rose from fallen needles, catching my toes and sending me staggering with each step. Grandma gasped beside me, half dragged, her thin legs trembling with effort. The woods stretched on endlessly, every tree the same twisted silhouette in the wavering candlelight ahead. The shadows closed in behind us. I could feel them brushing against my back, pressing cold fingers to my spine. My legs burned with each lunging step, muscles shaking so hard I thought they might give out before we reached the edge of the trees. We broke from the tree line into the open. The house stood ahead, porch lights dark, candles flickering weakly in the windows. My legs gave out for half a step, and Grandma stumbled beside me, her feet scraping uselessly across the grass. The shadows poured from the woods, stretching over the lawn in curling, gasping streams. She sagged in my arms, her head falling against my shoulder. Her voice was thin, barely more than a breath. "Leave me," she whispered. "You have to run. They're too close." "No," I gasped, tightening my grip around her waist. "I'm not leaving you." "Please," she breathed, tears spilling from her closed eyes. "Go. They only need one." I tried to pull her forward, but her knees buckled. It was a miracle she made it this far in her age, and it didn't look like we would be able to make the distance together. The shadows surged, reaching for her first, curling black fingers around her ankles and calves, creeping up a thin cotton nightgown. Panic burned in my throat, hot and choking. The house felt impossibly far away, its candlelight too weak to shield us from the cold tide crawling across the grass. A door swung open across the street. Mr. Harris, our elderly neighbor, stood in his doorway, holding out a pair of thick pillar candles, their flames strong and steady in the wind. His eyes were wide, shining with terror. "Take it," he shouted. I let go of Grandma's wrist for a split second, grabbing the candles from his shaking hand. I rushed the second into my Grandma's hand as she was being dragged across the lawn. The instant the flame passed into a grip, the shadows recoiled with a snapping hiss. Their shapes crumpled backward, folding in on themselves, until nothing remained but the night breeze bending in the grass. I clutched the candle to my chest, its warmth seeping into my frozen fingers. Grandma sagged against my side, her breaths ragged but strong. The porch boards creaked under our weight as I half dragged her up the steps and into the soft circle of flickering light. The first pale light of dawn bled into the sky, turning the edges of the woods to washed-out grey. Streetlights flickered back to life, humming with a familiar low buzz. Power returned with a quiet surge, clocks blinking 12 in every room. The candles still burned, their flames small and stubborn against the morning light. I sat beside Grandma's bed, dipping a cloth in warm water to clean the scratches along her arms. Her skin was thin and marked with bruises and cuts where the shadows had grabbed her. She winced once, then fell silent again, staring at the ceiling with heavy eyes. "Almost done," I whispered, wrapping gauze around the deeper cut near her elbow. My own hands trembled with exhaustion, wrists blotched with purple where clawed fingers had scraped away skin. The house felt empty, despite the quiet whir of appliances coming back to life. The candles burned on every shelf and table, their wicks curling black above trembling flames. Grandma's gaze shifted toward me, unfocused at first. Then her eyes cleared, and she reached out, her fingertips brushing my wrist. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw and hoarse. "Thank you for bringing me home." I swallowed the tight ache in my throat and pressed a hand between mine. "Rest now," I said. "You're safe." When her breathing slowed into a gentler rhythm, I stood and gathered the leftover candles from the hallway. The sun had risen beyond the fields, painting the window glass gold. But I lit one last candle anyway and set it on the sill. Its flame glowed against the daylight, a thin orange tongue dancing in silence. I watched the tree line beyond our yards, where the shadows still clung low to the ground. The candle flicked once, its scent of lavender curling warm into the room. Maybe this is how it goes, that when life ends here, we're taken to be one with those things. There's a chance I've disrupted the natural flow of this town. All I know is I've bought some more time for my grandma, for when she inevitably joins them in the next blackout. I run a demolition outfit based out of Fort Ridge. 3 trucks, 5 men, and a schedule so tight it squeaks. I've made a living taking jobs other crews turn down, usually because they're a mess of red tape, mold, or 30 years of asbestos behind every wall. Doesn't matter to me. You pay me, I'll knock it down. Fast. That's what made the Asylum job so tempting. Ridgeway State Hospital had been sitting on the outskirts of town since the 1930s. It shut down in '87, and no one has touched it since. Local kids dared each other to sneak in, but most folks just steered clear. The town finally got a grant to tear it down and turn the land into a civic park or water treatment facility, depending on which council member you asked. I didn't care. The contract was city approved, and a $30,000 bonus was offered if we finished before the deadline. 30 grand for a month's work was enough to keep my crew paid through winter. I'd already started cutting corners to make sure we beat the clock. During our pre-demo walkthrough, I had the blueprints rolled under one arm and a flashlight in the other. Harris, the city rep, walked ahead of me, discussing asbestos maps and load-bearing walls. Most of the hospital was your standard early century build, red brick with steel girders and slate floors. You could practically smell the electroshock therapy in the walls. We reached the sub-basement through a narrow stairwell behind the boiler room. That's when I noticed something off. At the far end of the corridor, where the blueprint showed an old storage annex, there was a wall. Not an original wall. This one was newer, with bricks set unevenly and mortar that was sloppy. Someone had sealed the hallway by hand. Blueprint says this leads to Archive B, I told Harris, tapping the page. Looks like it was part of the original design. He didn't even slow down. Yeah, that area got sealed back in the early 2000s. No entry records, no inspection forms. City says we're not touching it. Why? I asked. If it's part of the structure, we're supposed to clear it. He shook his head. That's the issue. It's not listed on the active plans. Legally, it's unacknowledged. If we file to unseal it, that opens a chain of delays. Environmental inspections, historical society review, maybe even a zoning appeal. I frowned. How long are we talking? 4 to 6 weeks, minimum. Whole project freezes until it's cleared. Your bonus goes up in smoke. We stood there for a moment, both of us looking at the bricked wall. The mortar looked old but brittle. Someone had done it quickly. No signage, no permit tags, just a narrow hallway someone wanted gone. Mark it inaccessible and move on, Harris said, scribbling something on his clipboard. The city's covering its ass. So should you. I nodded and we kept walking. But I didn't stop thinking about that wall. If my crew found it while gutting the substructure, they'd start asking questions. That meant someone would call it in and the whole damn timeline could collapse. I wasn't about to lose my payday over one sealed room that some bureaucrat had forgotten to add to the plans. I figured I'd handle it quietly. Nights after the crew clocked out. If there was something worth seeing behind that wall, I'd see it myself, no reports, no delays. And if it turned out to be nothing, even better. We started demolition from the top down, roof sheeting, tiles, plasterboard, and load-bearing elements. Anything that wasn't stone got stripped and dumped. Within the first few days, the upper floors were gutted clean. My crew worked fast. We always did. But something about Ridgeway State Hospital slowed them piece by piece. At first, it was small things. Tools left in one room ended up in another. Power flickered even with our generators running steadily. One of the guys swore his ladder had shifted on its own while he was on it. I chalked it up to nerves and caffeine. Rushing a job meant taking less precaution and paying less attention. The trick is to have just enough to not have accidents. Then came the sounds. Footsteps, banging, always in the halls we'd already cleared. Hollow echoes that didn't match our movements. One afternoon, Carl radioed me from East Wing, saying he heard someone whispering through a vent. Swore he could hear his name. I checked it out. The vent was clogged with 30 years of dust and bird droppings. Whatever he'd heard, it wasn't a voice. But the real shift came with Manny. He was one of my best guys. Ex-military, didn't scare easily. But that morning, I found him standing in the sub-basement, staring at the bricked-up corridor. He wasn't supposed to be there. I called his name twice before he turned to face me. His face was pale, eyes glassy, as if he'd just come out of a fever dream. "I'm done," he said. "You can mail my check." I frowned. What happened? He silently stepped past me, grabbed his things, and walked straight off sight. Before he left, he said one thing. "It doesn't want to go." I didn't ask what it was. I should have, but we were already behind schedule and I couldn't afford to lose another day. I covered Manny's hours myself, hoping he'd come to his senses and return to work. Hauled trash, logged loads, didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. And still, the sealed corridor sat there in my head like a rotten tooth. I started dreaming about it. Always the same thing. One long room, rows of chairs facing a whitewashed wall. No windows, no doors. Just me, standing at the back, watching them. An empty chair, but it wasn't really empty. I could feel something waiting on it, just behind the veil. 3 days later, a new city rep showed up. Young guy, sharp haircut, shoes too clean for the site. "How's progress?" he asked, flipping through my reports. "Smooth," I lied. "Right on target." He nodded, made a few notes, didn't ask about the bricked corridor. Probably didn't even know it was there. I kept it that way. The crew clocked out around 6. I stayed behind, made up a story about reviewing reports. The truth was, I didn't want anyone around when I opened the corridor. Too many eyes meant too many questions, and I already had a good rhythm with the city rep. If I could just clear the space and log it, I could list it as it was in the blueprints. Box checked, no delays. I wheeled the concrete saw down into the sub-basement, every step echoing off the stone walls. The temperature dropped the deeper I went. Humidity hung in the air, thick and musty. The corridor stood waiting at the end of the service hallway, its cinderblock seal untouched since the day I first noticed it. I marked the wall with chalk, fitted my respirator, and started cutting. It took longer than I expected. The mortar was thick and industrial grade, sloppily applied but heavy set, like whoever sealed this space hadn't wanted it reopened. But $30,000 was waiting on the other side of the completed demo, and this wall and what lay beyond stood in the way. The blocks gave way in chunks. Dust billowed out in hot, chemical-tasting bursts. I smashed through the final layer with a sledgehammer, grunting as stone clattered across the floor. My flashlight pierced the darkness beyond. The hallway was pristine. No water damage, no graffiti. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic. The linoleum tiles were uncracked. The paint a faded institutional green. My boots left prints in the dustless floor, which made no sense. Everything else in this place had been eaten by time. At the end of the hall stood a single, padded cell. The door creaked open under my hand, revealing a narrow space, soft-walled, lined with yellowed cushions. An old hospital cot sat in the center, fitted with leather restraints. The mattress was thin, sunken in the middle. A cracked mirror was mounted crooked above a bolted desk. I caught my reflection in the shattered glass, my face broken into jagged angles. On the floor beneath the cot, a circle had been carved into the tiles. The cuts were deep and deliberate, each line etched with something sharp. Nails, maybe? The etching was unfamiliar but felt wrong, off balance, like it pulled at something in the back of my mind I didn't know I had. When I walked around, I could feel myself lean toward it, like it had its own gravity, a vertigo feeling that always gravitated toward the strange markings. A rusted metal chair stood beside the bed. A patient logbook rested on the seat, its leather cover warped with age. I opened it with cautious fingers. The entries were brief and clinical, typed on a mechanical typewriter. Most were mundane. Dietary notes, behavior logs, sedation levels. But the last page stopped me cold. It was handwritten. Do not remove her, do not observe her, do not allow her name to be spoken aloud. I flipped back. Earlier entries had referred to her only as the subject, but in the margins of the logbook's back cover, scratched deep into the leather, was a name. And then I saw it, again and again and again. On the padded wall beside the cot, on the mattress straps, etched into the foam in ragged fingernail grooves. The same name, over and over. I didn't speak it, but I read it. And in that moment, the temperature in the room dropped so sharply I could see my breath. The cot creaked behind me. I wasn't alone anymore. I backed out of the cell without turning around. I didn't breathe until I was back in the corridor, then again when I made it up the basement stairs. I shut off the lights, locked the exterior doors behind me, and didn't stop moving until I was behind the wheel of my truck. My hands trembled on the drive home. I told myself I'd leave it alone for now, figure out another way to finish the job. The job had to stay on track. That was all that mattered. Before first light, I came back to the site and sealed the entrance. I dragged old plywood sheets from a scrap pile, bolted them over the fresh gap I'd cut the night before, screwed them tight into the concrete frame, then tagged the boards with paint marker. Asbestos, do not remove. Later that morning, I told the crew I'd found some outdated insulation that needed reporting before we continued demolition on that section. City doesn't want the paperwork, I said, shaking my head. They're telling us to wall it off and move on, so we're moving on. Nobody questioned it. Most of them didn't know about the odd situation anyway, so they believed whatever I told them. But the next day, everything went wrong. One of the excavators clipped a gas line that shouldn't have been there. Then the backhoe, idle seconds before, lurched sideways and crushed one of the old support beams. Nobody was hurt, but it set us back by 2 days. The welder, Nate, caught a flashback from his own torch, equipment failure, 2nd or 3rd degree burns. He didn't say a word on the way to the ambulance, just stared at me, lips trembling. Manny didn't come back either. I kept my mouth shut, told the others it was old wiring, rusted valves, and bad luck. Every job this size had hiccups. I just needed them to keep working. That night, I reviewed the security from the demo yard. One of the perimeter sensors had malfunctioned during the equipment failures. I scrubbed through the logs. Around 2:07 a.m., the infrared sensor picked up movement. Something moving the length of the fence. Slow, steady, never stopping. It passed beneath the floodlights. No body heat signature, no footprints left in the gravel. I didn't sleep that night. At home, I heard the name, the one scratched into the mattress, the walls, the log cover, whispered through heating vents. The voice wasn't mine, wasn't male, wasn't human. The 5th accident ended it. Reggie, one of the oldest on the crew, dropped a steel support bracket from a 2nd-story scaffold. Said his hands seized up mid-swing. When I helped him down, I saw the swelling already forming around his wrist, bones out of place. He was shaking. "It wasn't me," he muttered. "Something grabbed me, I swear to God." That was the last straw. They packed up and left before lunch. I didn't try to stop them. By that point, the job was nearly done. The southern wing was already leveled. The rest of the upper floors had been gutted and stripped to code. We just needed to bring down the basement shell and clear the debris. 2 days of work, maybe 3. That was all that stood between me and the bonus. The inspection was scheduled for Monday morning. I could already feel the city rep's smug tone when he'd tell me the penalty for delays. I wasn't going to let that happen. The truth was simple. I needed the payout. My own truck was 3 months behind on payments. My wife had taken our daughter to her sister's after the last layoff. If this job fell through, I didn't have a next one lined up. So, I came back that night with gloves, floodlights, and a crowbar. I just wanted to finish what I'd started. The plywood barrier was still in place over the sealed corridor. I pried off the boards one by one and stacked them neatly against the wall, telling myself it was just another hallway. I kept my eyes down, focused on the floor, and walked slowly down the slope into the untouched wing. The air shifted as soon as I crossed the threshold. Heavy, no dust, still smelled of antiseptic and something sweeter underneath, like spoiled fruit. The crying started while I was checking the junction pipes near the boiler panel. It was faint at first, so soft I thought it might be water in the walls. But then I heard the breath between sobs, a wet, rasping inhale. A woman's voice, broken and rhythmic, repeating something I couldn't quite understand. A lullaby with no tune. I followed it. Each door I passed was open just a crack. I kept glancing in, expecting to find someone inside. But every room was empty. Old beds, restraints on the wall hooks, and cabinets bolted shut. Then I reached the padded room. The crying stopped. I froze in the center of the corridor, surrounded by doors that had quietly clicked shut behind me. The padded room was just ahead. I tilted toward it, careful not to make a sound. It looked the same as before. Empty, cot untouched, restraints neatly folded. No visible change, but something in the air had thickened. It pressed against my skin in a way that made my pulse skip a beat. I stepped inside. The mirror was cracked again, a fresh line through the glass, spider webbing out from the center. Beneath it, the old circles scratched into the floor seemed more faded than I recalled, like someone had been working at it. But there was no one here. No body, no footprints in the dustless room, no source of the crying. Still, I could feel her. Not see, not hear, but feel. The room wasn't empty anymore. Something stood just beyond my focus, behind the veil of what my eyes could comprehend. I backed out of the doorway, one step at a time, didn't turn around, didn't speak. The crying didn't return, but the silence was worse. I scoped out what needed to be done for demolition, but as I left, the hallway was different. Longer, narrower, the angles had warped somehow. Every step felt wrong, like the building had shifted when no one was looking. I found the room again, but the door wasn't the same anymore. Wider, open just a crack, waiting for me. The cot was empty, restraints gone. The circle on the floor had been scraped almost completely away. I could hear her now, not beside me, but inside the space, breathing in rhythm with mine, close enough that the air stirred when I moved. It hit me, suddenly and stupidly. Her name. It had been carved everywhere for a reason, not to draw her out, to bury her. I remembered old stories, demon names, binding rites, exorcisms. Speak the name, and the thing loses its power. I stood at the edge of the circle and whispered it. Once, then again. The silence pulled back from the corners of the room, and she answered. Not in words, not even sound, but in pressure, in presence. Something stepped into the room that hadn't fully existed before. The cot groaned under unseen weight. The restraint snapped tight without hands. The mirror uncracked itself with a low pop. And for a split second, my reflection wasn't alone. A second face stood behind mine, pale, incomplete. I stumbled back, gasping. The silence didn't return, not fully. The room didn't breathe the same way it had before. A slow pressure thickened in my ears, then in my chest, until I couldn't tell if I was inhaling or if something was pushing against my lungs from the inside. A faint creak echoed behind me. I turned, heart hammering, but the doorway was empty, still cracked open, still letting in the same cold hallway air. But something was in the room now. Not invisible, not visible either, just present, as though I'd stepped onto a stage where someone else had been waiting for the cue. And now, I'd spoken it. The cot pulled tight against its bolts, the mattress sank in the middle, pitched down by nothing I could see. In the mirror, I saw the shape again, clearer this time. Not fully formed, but tall, hollow-eyed, and standing so close behind me, I could feel heat on the back of my neck. My own face was still, but hers were moving, lips forming syllables I couldn't hear, mouthing the same name I just said. I backed out slowly, holding my breath. The air around the circle felt different now, less like a warning, more like a crack in concrete that had just spread wide open. I thought I'd been clever. I thought knowing her name gave me power. But as I stepped out into the hallway and the door clicked softly shut behind me, I realized it had never been about power. It was about permission. I woke on a stretcher, strapped in, sunlight bleeding through the clouds overhead. The sky was too bright. Voices moved around me in snippets, dulled and distant, warped as if underwater. Must have missed his last checkout scan. Dehydrated, maybe concussed. An EMT leaned closer and said, "You're lucky someone noticed. If you'd stayed in there much longer." I blinked, my throat dry. I asked how long I'd been inside. She frowned. 3 days. That didn't make sense. I told her it had only been an hour, maybe 2. She looked at the other medic and didn't answer. Later, in the ambulance, someone explained they found the sub-basement corridor sealed shut. The supports must have shifted behind me. No one had even known I was there until the city reps saw the site empty and checked the logs and saw I hadn't checked out. We tried to jackhammer through the wall. The whole damn passage had folded in on itself. Freak structural failure. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. They kept me overnight for observation. No injuries aside from a shallow scrape on my wrist. I didn't remember getting it. The next morning, I was released. I turned my phone on in the parking lot. 27 missed calls. A new voicemail was left from the city rep saying not to worry about the bonus, that they'd extend the project deadline, that I should take some time off, and new crew would finish the remaining teardown at their expense as compensation. I went home and slept for nearly 2 days, dreamless, empty sleep. Then, I got the update email. Cleanup successful, site declared safe, no structural hazards or environmental concerns, photos of the cleared corridor and cell attached. I clicked through the images. The hallway was pictured there, long and cracked, with the ceiling slouching from age. The padded cell hadn't changed. Cot in the corner, cracked mirror, restraint still bolted to the frame, leather dried and curling at the edges. No name marked on any of the objects anymore. The circle of markings was almost entirely erased from the floor. No one had tried to make sense of it. And yet, nothing happened. The demolition crews had gone in, walked through that space, demolished it, and moved on. They saw old damage, remnants of a decaying building, and treated it that way. Just another strange wing in a place full of bad history. The job was on schedule. According to the update, they'd hit the new deadline. No delays, no reports of equipment failure or personnel incidents. Nothing like what happened to me and my crew. The email ended by telling me the bonus was mine and I should expect it within the coming days. I actually laughed. A short, breathless sound I hadn't felt in weeks. It hadn't been real. It couldn't have been. Stress maybe, sleep deprivation, the pressure of the deadline, and too much time in a building full of ghosts that weren't mine. They went inside, nothing happened, and I was home, safe, paid, job finished. That should have been the end of it. But that night, sitting at my kitchen table, I opened the photos again, scrolled through slowly, stopped on one, the cell shot from the hallway. I zoomed in on the mirror. I expected to see something, my brain on overload, and I was paranoid. Nothing was there. Tension was building. I felt like I was in the hallway again, the pressure of the room weighing on me as I tried to solve something I didn't know needed solving. I flicked through the pictures, zooming in and scanning pixel by pixel for a clue, a hint toward an answer. Yet nothing I saw could explain why I could feel it again, the presence returning. I lifted my head, ready to feel like I'm lifting my head out of a barrel of water. Yet the relief never came. And finally, I realized why I could feel like everything was off. My room was darker than I remembered, colder, chills trickled through me in a stream. No one else was in the room, nothing moved. But the silence had changed, thick now, a waiting kind of quiet. I closed the laptop, stared at the wall for a long time. Maybe the new crew didn't find her because she wasn't there. Maybe she came with me. I work nights at a storage facility on the edge of town, the kind of place nobody really notices until they need it. It's a squat little compound tucked between the back end of a shuttered strip mall and a drainage canal that smells worse in the summer. Most of the fluorescent lights hum or flicker. A few don't bother turning on at all. The vending machine in the office takes your money, but won't give you a soda unless you hit the right spot on the side with the heel of your hand. The job isn't complicated. Lock the gate at 11, unlock it at 6, walk the rows once or twice during the night, make sure no tweakers are nesting inside an unlocked unit. The cameras are mostly active, the alarms work when they want to. If anyone asks, the answer's always the same. Nobody's supposed to be here after dark. I've had co-workers on and off. They don't stick around. Teenagers, burnouts, parolees working off-court ordered employment. They come and go fast enough that I don't remember their names. Management doesn't seem to care who's on shift, so long as someone fills out the logbooks and nobody burns the place down. There's only one real rule here, and it's not in the handbook. Don't mess with Unit 103. Old padlock on the door, heavy enough to stop a crowbar. The records flag it as do not access. No one opens it, no one rents it. Not officially. Still, every month there's a payment. Always cash, always exact. No return address on the envelope. Some months the envelope isn't there at all. Doesn't matter. The ledger gets updated, paid in full. Far as I can tell, Unit 103's been here longer than the company that runs this place. Maybe longer than the building itself. The email came in on a Monday night, one of those generic corporate blasts from some office far away. All units must be accounted for by the end of the quarter. Visual confirmation, inventory checklist, photographic evidence. The usual box ticking to satisfy someone's spreadsheet. I scrolled through the list, already knowing the answer before I asked. Still, I brought it up during our weekly call with the site manager. What about 103? There was a pause. Then my manager's tone shifted, just enough for me to catch it. Skip it. Don't log it. You don't want to mess with that paperwork. Just trust me. That was it. End of discussion. Later, I brought it up in the break room with one of my co-workers. a guy whose name I hadn't bothered to learn, just chatting between rounds of walking the fence line. I mentioned something about Unit 103, half jokingly. He stopped chewing his sandwich. "Don't even say the number out loud," he told me. No laughter, no follow-up. He packed up his lunch and went back to sweeping out an empty unit without another word. I started paying closer attention after that. Little things caught my eye. Locks on units that hadn't been opened in years, looks as if they had been freshly handled. Scratches on 103's padlock, new ones gouged into the old metal. I knew nobody had the keys, not even me. That's when curiosity started digging in. Not a question of why anymore, just a question of when I'd stop looking and start doing. On slow nights, I started digging through old records. There wasn't much else to do. A few battered filing cabinets sat in the back office, stuffed with faded contracts and receipts going back decades. Most of it was routine. Late payments, auctions, and unit transfers. But not 103. Unit 103 had been listed in every set of records I could find, including those predating the current building. I found paperwork dating back far enough that the company name on the letterhead no longer existed. Handwritten leases renewed over and over. Different names on the documents, but none of them sounding real. LLCs dissolved 50 years ago, banks that folded in the 70s. Some of the signatures barely passed for handwriting at all. Jagged scrawls, symbols, loops. A few were signed in red ink that had bled through the pages beneath. One looked smeared, as if the ink hadn't been allowed to dry properly. Still, the payment never stopped. Every month, without fail, the ledger marked paid. No account overdue, no notices sent. The hallway lights started going out next, first flickering, then shorting entirely. Maintenance came twice, replaced the bulbs and checked the wiring. Both times, the lights failed again within the week. The rest of the building stayed fine. I started losing track of time during my shifts, waking up from what felt like less sleep and more like a trance, always standing in the same place, halfway down the hallway, facing Unit 103. I couldn't say how long I'd been there. Minutes, hours, just staring at that dented metal door with its rusted padlock hanging loose on the hatch. One night, I knelt to check the gap beneath it, found something wedged there. Dry, cracked pieces of something curled in on themselves. Too small to be cloth, too fibrous to be bone. Not organic exactly, but not quite anything else either. I flushed them down the break room toilet, thinking it was something that needed disposing of. But later, I couldn't shake the feeling I should have kept them. Co-workers started complaining after that. Scratching noises from inside 103, shuffling sounds, something knocking, slow and steady from within. Management's response was flat. "Rats," they said. "Don't ask again." Management stopped responding to my questions. I stopped asking. Not because I didn't want answers anymore, but because I wanted proof. Something undeniable. I started watching 103 more closely. Every night of my rounds, I checked the dust patterns across the concrete. The grime in this place settled thick. But around 103, it moved. Fine layers swept into spirals, smears stretched toward the doorframe as if something had dragged itself forward on hands or elbows. Footprints showed up where no one had walked, always leading to the door, never away. The smell grew worse by the week. Not the sharp stink of mold or decay. Something colder, Wet concrete left too long in standing water, burnt metal, rust blooming under damp stone. It hung in the air even when the wind cut through the rows of units, heavier near 103 than anywhere else. One night, in the back of an old maintenance manual, I found a logbook I hadn't seen before. Torn pages, scribbled notes. Most of it was routine. Bulbs replaced, doors rehung, pest control visits. The final entry stopped me cold, written in shaky block letters across the last page. It's not what's in there. It's what it thinks it's keeping out. I waited for someone to step in. A manager, an inspector, even another faceless corporate email reminding me not to ask questions. But no one came. No one seemed to care. However, I gained a new understanding, or at least a theory to work with. The rule wasn't about keeping us safe. It was about keeping it undisturbed, about leaving it unobserved, containment through neglect. Watching it gave it shape, thinking about it gave it weight. And now, I'd been paying attention for far too long, too late to go back to ignoring it. So, I went about trying to fix it. One night, after locking the front gate and double-checking the cameras, I grabbed a pair of bolt cutters from the tool locker, walked the rows like I always did, except this time, I didn't stop at the end of the hallway. I went straight to 103. The padlock looked heavier than it was. Old steel, scabbed with rust. It gave way on the second squeeze. The metal snapped clean through, falling to the ground without a sound. I pulled the door open, slow, careful, expecting something worse than what I found. No body, no monster waiting in the dark, not even the expected black void stretching off into nowhere. Just the storage unit. Concrete walls, metal shelves bolted to the sides, coated in a thick layer of undisturbed dust. In the center, a chair. Wooden, plain, set facing the back wall. Nothing sat in it, nothing crouched behind it. No stains, no scratches, no signs of violence or ritual, or anything else my imagination had been feeding me for weeks. I felt disappointed, ashamed almost. All that paranoia for an empty room. When I tried to close the door again, it didn't fit the frame. The whole doorframe had shifted, warped slightly outward, bent at the edges, metal flexed out from the concrete. Simply put, it no longer closed all the way. I remember the door being airtight. This half-inch gap wasn't something I'd simply missed in my observations. Still, I had to close it. I jammed on the old lock and twisted it to look untouched, knowing others avoided 103 on their shifts. It started slow. A week after I opened 103, other units began unlocking themselves. Not kicked open, not broken into, just ajar, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. A door hanging an inch off the latch, a padlock dangling loose where it had been secure the night before. Inside, things didn't make sense. TVs left behind were still warm to the touch, their standing lights blinking in dark rooms with no power connection, fridges humming quietly, lights flickering behind cracked doors, food sitting on tables, untouched but far too fresh for how long these units had been sealed. Each one felt paused, suspended in the exact moment their owners stepped away. Time bent around those thresholds. Minutes passed strangely when I stood in them. Watches ticked slowly, phones refused to keep signal. I reported it, of course, logged everything, Photos, serial numbers, detailed notes on the oddities. Management responded with the same tone they used for 103. Forced calm, thin smiles, tight voices. "The unit shifts sometimes," they said. "Locks fail. These things happen." When I pressed them, asking why none of this was in the manuals and why there wasn't a protocol, they only grew quieter. Reassurances fell flat. "Stick to the rounds. Keep your head down." They sent a guy from maintenance to relock the doors. He worked without comment, without hesitation, locked everything up and left with a nod, as though this was routine, as though this was exactly what he had been hired to do. Although he never saw that Unit 103 was actually unlocked, as he avoided it, presumably by instruction from management. The message was clear. Ignore it, leave it alone, and it stays manageable. Poke it, and things get worse. That was the rule. Ignorance kept it docile. Attention made it restless. But that was the problem. I couldn't unsee what I had started. I couldn't unthink it. I had let something stretch, and now it was pulling at the seams of the whole place. I had been curious. I had gone too far. Still, I told myself I could fix it. I could put it back the way it was, seal 103, relock the others, return the building to its quiet, decaying routine. I thought maybe, if I moved fast enough and showed I understood the job now, it would let me. That was the only plan left. Fix it. Put everything back in its place. When alone, I went back to 103 with a new lock in hand, heavier this time, industrial grade. I drilled fresh holes, set new brackets, and reinforced the frame where it had warped. When I cinched the lock shut, it felt solid, secure. By the next night, it had bent itself open again. The metal twisted outward at the edges, straining against bolts I knew I had driven clean. Nothing dramatic, no noise, no spectacle, just quiet pressure until the steel gave way. I tried again. Different lock, a different bracket, more reinforcement. The same result. The door refused to stay closed. Management knew. I did not even need to tell them. They called me into the office at the end of my shift. No warning, no explanation, just the text from the manager's personal phone. "Come to the office. Bring your keys." The lights were already off when I got there. Only the hallway bulbs still burned, buzzing faintly against the silence. I half expected the door to be locked, half expected to find nobody waiting for me at all. But the door swung open as I approached. Inside, the manager sat behind the desk, hands folded over a manila folder that bore no label. He didn't gesture for me to sit, didn't offer a drink, just watched me come in and close the door behind me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked at last, his voice quiet, measured. I shook my head. I kept my hands on my keys. Part of me wondered if this was the end of the line, if I had looked too closely, pried too far, if they were going to walk me down to 103, unlock the door, and shut it behind me. "I imagine you think you've been clever," he said, breaking into 103, trying to fix what you don't understand. He opened the folder. Inside were papers I didn't recognize. My employee file maybe, a list of incidents, security logs, photos of me on my rounds, standing too long outside wrong doors, opening the wrong locks. "We warn people for a reason," the manager said. That unit stays closed because ignoring it keeps it quiet, like a dog that forgets to bark if no one is around. Attention stirs it up, curiosity wakes it, obsession makes it stretch. He closed the folder with a soft tap of his fingers. Most people can't help themselves. They leave eventually, or they're removed. You lasted longer. You showed patience. You followed the pattern. You didn't just break the rules. You tested them. I felt my throat dry out. So, what happens now? He smiled, not cruelly, almost kindly. Think of it as a promotion. He pushed the new set of keys across the desk toward me. Not just for the gates, not just for the office. A ring of keys I didn't recognize. Keys that had weight to them. Keys that belonged to things I hadn't seen yet. This place needs a caretaker. People who understand the rhythm of things. People willing to watch the locks and turn them when they stop holding. It's not an easy job. It's not always clear what you're keeping out, or what you're keeping in. He leaned back in the chair, still watching me with that calm, unreadable expression. The manager slid the folder closer to me with one finger, nodding for me to open it. Inside wasn't just my employee file. There were other names, other dates, a list of people who had come before me. Some I recognized from the old maintenance logs I'd found buried in storage. Each entry ended the same way. Reassigned, containment oversight. No resignation dates, no severance details. Just that flat, final note. You're not just getting a promotion, the manager said. You're inheriting something, a responsibility that doesn't end. Not until it passes on again. He stood, stretched slowly, tired bones cracking in his shoulders. In the dim light, he leaned towards me. I got a better look at his face. He looked young but wore old features. Age eroded on him in layers. This building doesn't exist to store furniture, or paperwork, or people's junk. It exists to hold things in. 103 isn't special. It's just the oldest. The others are newer, less settled, but they all need attention. They all need caretakers who know which doors to leave alone and which ones to lock twice. I looked down at the folder. Some units had been reclassified over time. Their numbers changed, their locations shifted. But the patterns were there. Always a handful, growing restless at once. Always the same kind of person brought in to notice, to intervene. If no one does the job, the doors won't stay closed, he said. When one opens, the others follow. You saw it yourself. You started the chain. You're the only one who can put it back the way it was. I asked the question hanging at the back of my throat. What if I leave? He smiled, small. I couldn't tell if it was pity or amusement. People don't leave. They either lock the doors or join what's behind them. He picked up the folder again, tapped it twice against the desk like closing the lid on a box. You've lasted longer than most. That tells us you understand. Or you will, soon enough. He showed me to the door. The hallway stretched out ahead, quiet as ever. The keys heavy in my hand, too late to pretend I hadn't earned them. I walked the facility alone that night, the new keys cold in my hand. The rows of units stretched out under dead fluorescent lights, the air hanging heavy with a faint scent of dust and damp concrete. I thought at first it was my imagination, the way my breath fogged in the air, even though the night wasn't cold enough for it. But the further I walked, the colder it felt. The stillness wasn't right. Doors hung open where they shouldn't. Not wide, not broken. Just ajar. A fraction of an inch here, a full handspan there. Locks dangling loose, some fallen to the ground without a sound. Lights flickered behind those doors. Televisions buzzed faintly in empty rooms. Something inside breathed in time with my footsteps, slow and deliberate, though nothing moved in the spaces beyond the thresholds. No shapes waited in the dark, no faces pressed into the cracks, just open doors, waiting. I understood. It wasn't about monsters hiding inside. It was about the act itself. Doors open too long invited attention. Left unchecked, they invited worse. If I didn't close them, someone else would pay the price for my hesitation. So, I went to work. One by one, I closed them, checked the seals, turned the locks using the new keys until they clicked shut, logged each one in the ledger with slow, steady handwriting. Lock, ledger, lock, ledger. No answers waited for me, no final reveal of what I'd been keeping in or what might one day slip free. Just the cold repetition of the task I'd inherited, a rhythm as old as the building itself. Lock, ledger, move on to the next. Years went by without me noticing, or maybe noticing didn't matter anymore. As soon as I was proficient at the job, my manager disappeared, just stopped showing up to work. I saw a letter from upper management simply stating that I was the new acting manager. The job never changed, but I did. My bones ached in ways they shouldn't, eyes slow to adjust, joints stiff. Some mornings, I sat too long in the chair at the desk, staring at the logbook, unsure whether I'd finished the shift or was about to start one. They tell me it was stress or lack of sleep. Maybe I believed that if I wasn't still young enough to know better. I watched the new hires come and go. Most treated this place as a pit stop. A few months of easy nights, just enough money to bridge the gap to something better. They talked about future plans, schools, promotions, travel, anything else. Some lasted less than a week. The long hallways got to them, the way sound carried when it shouldn't, the way certain doors seemed to breathe if you stood too close. They all left in the end. They always do. Somewhere along the way, I started slipping, missing things. Locks were undone for longer than they should have been, units shifting without my notice. I double back on rounds and find doors open behind me, though I just walked past. I told myself it was age catching up. That made it easier to explain, easier than admitting this place was draining me, pulling something from me a little more each year. Then came the new hire. Young, quiet, observant in the way that made me wary. I caught them lingering too long in front of 103, asking the wrong questions, running their fingertips along the locks like they were looking for something hidden beneath the rust. I recognized the look. I remembered wearing it. One night, as they clocked in, I handed them the rounds sheet, casual as I could manage. "Don't bother with 103, I told them. "Trust me, just keep the doors locked. That's the job." They nodded, said they understood. But I knew better. I'd said the same thing once and still found myself standing with bolt cutters in my hands, staring at a door that would not stay shut. Now, I wait. Wait to see if they'll listen, or if they'll open it. Wait to see if they'll end up in this chair with my keys on their belt, wondering when the ache started and why the clock ticks so slowly here. Hopefully, maybe someone else can take this from me, that I can finally leave, whatever leaving means. But I wonder what happens to me when that day comes, where I'll go. Or if there's a door somewhere, waiting for me too. Dentists are the worst patients. We all know the signs, but we also know all the excuses. It started a week ago with a deep ache in my jaw. At first, it was sharp and persistent, but then it settled into a low, pulsing pressure that spread up to the side of my face. For the past few days, I'd catch myself grinding against it without knowing, biting down just to meet the resistance. It got bad enough that I had to take an X-ray between appointments. I thought maybe I'd missed something obvious, like a cracked cusp, an inflamed ligament, but everything came up clean. I told myself it would ease up in a day or two. Most things do. I work at a small dental practice which consists of 3 rooms and a waiting area, no larger than a living room. The building had once been a bank, long before my time, and the old vault door still sat bolted to the rear hallway wall, a relic we couldn't afford to remove. We use the vault as a supply room now. Stock came in through the side entrance and got stored behind that heavy door where the safety deposit boxes used to be. I'd taken over the practice from my mentor nearly 20 years ago, back when the carpets were new and the NHS still sent inspectors. Since then, I've had budgets slashed, suppliers cutting corners, fewer staff, and fewer patients who could afford regular care. But I kept going. The girl in the chair today couldn't have been more than 8. She was nervous, fidgety, her small hands tugging at the cuff of a school jumper as we went through the usual questions, like, how many times a day do you brush, and manual or electric? All of which her mother answered. She chipped one of her molars chewing on a hard sweet, and a small cavity had opened up beneath a crack, just deep enough to need filling before it turned into something worse. She looked terrified. It's just a small filling, that's all, I reassured her, keeping my voice low and easy, the tone I'd perfected over years to calm my patients. Nothing you'll even notice after a day. She gave me a look like she wasn't so sure. I had one just last week myself, I added, opening my mouth so she could get a good view and pointing towards the tooth with a gloved finger. Didn't hurt at all, barely felt it really. A lie, technically. The ache had been waking me up some nights now, a deep, throbbing thing under the back of my molar they'd patched with one of the new composite kits. That's what I get for letting a student dental nurse practice on me. But I assured this girl that she had nothing to worry about. I had perfected this. She seemed to relax a little at that, enough to lean back without gripping the chair arms so tightly. Kelly stood to my left, ready with a suction, watching the girl more than the tools. She'd been assisting in this practice longer than I'd been running it. She had a good instinct for nerves, knew when to speak and when not to. I gave her a small nod of approval and adjusted the light. As I worked, a slow, pulsing pressure pressed in my jaw, which seemed to keep in time with the drill. I ignored it. When the girl and her mother left, I cleaned down the room and logged the notes into the system. Another job done. Outside, the afternoon had started to slide into grey, the sky thick with the kind of clouds that promised rain by evening. I was halfway through preparing for my next patient when the receptionist buzzed through. "Mr. Collins is here early. Says he's in quite a bit of discomfort." I checked the screen. Collins had only been in 2 weeks ago. A standard cavity, nothing remarkable. Composite filling, same batch as the others. Just as I was about to call him, I caught a notification at the bottom of my screen. It was another email from my daughter, Claire. I didn't have time to open it now. She was still abroad, enjoying her 20s, moving from place to place. She mentioned before that she didn't trust the dentists out there. Just a few weeks ago, I sent her some spare composite kits, adhesives, and a new pack of etch and bond. They were extras from the new supplier. They'd sent more than I ordered, probably hoping to keep me on as a regular customer. I sighed and rubbed at my jaw. Then, I called Collins through. He shuffled into the chair with a stiff wariness. He was in his mid-40s. Over the 10 years he'd been coming here, I'd learned that he was a factory worker and the kind of man who didn't complain unless something was really wrong. "It's been aching like hell," he said. "Keeps me up some nights. Feels like it's moving, if that makes sense." I nodded, already pulling up the x-ray from last time. "Any swelling? Fever?" "No fever. A bit tender. Hurts more at night. It has a dull sort of pressure." I lined him up for a fresh x-ray, tilting the sensor to catch the apex properly. My jaw throbbed as I worked, as if it were keeping pace with the hum of the machine. I tried not to rub at it while he watched. When the image loaded, I pulled up the last one beside it for comparison. I'd taken it barely a fortnight ago. I was expecting a slight shift, perhaps a faint halo at the apex, something I could attribute to early pubertas or a missed microfracture, something familiar. Instead, the interior of the tooth looked dramatically worse. There were voids and areas beneath the enamel that had been solid a week ago, now hollowed. The density wasn't right, and on closer inspection, there was a neat, round hole. I leaned in closer to the monitor. I've been staring at dental films for 30 years, and I'd never seen voids like that. Clean, deliberate looking, almost surgical, except no drill had done this. Still, I kept my tone calm when I turned back to Collins. No point worrying him unnecessarily. "All right, let's have a closer look. Sit back for me." He settled into the chair again, slower this time, rubbing his jaw with a wince as he went. I called through for one of the dental nurses to come in and assist, and told her I'd be removing the filling to take a closer look. Kelly came in. "Composites failing already?" she asked, pulling on gloves. "Maybe. I need a proper look," I said. She didn't ask to see the x-ray and set up the tray. Despite her lack of questions, we both knew patients didn't usually end up back in the chair this soon unless something had gone wrong. Collins lay back and waited. I adjusted the light, checked the anesthetic had taken hold, and gave it another minute just to be sure. No need to rush. The drill felt heavier than usual in my hand. I worked carefully, easing through the composite in slow, deliberate passes. Kelly held the suction ready without a word. Something about the way the filling lifted didn't sit right. The material crumbled away too easily, coming loose in brittle flakes instead of the solid, predictable chunks I'd placed. Beneath it, the tooth wasn't solid. The structure had given up on holding shape. Kelly noticed it too. I didn't need to look to know she was watching. When I glanced up, she met my eye with a silent, questioning look. I gave a small nod. "Carry on." I irrigated the cavity, cleared what debris I could, suction catching the fragments as they floated free. The deeper I went, the more of it seemed to fall apart under the burr. It shouldn't have looked like that. Not this soon, not from a simple filling. Kelly handed me the endoprobe without asking. I tapped gently at the exposed dentin, probing for stability. The tip sank deeper than it should have, catching in a void beneath the surface. I paused, leaning in closer, adjusting the light for a better view. The walls of the tooth flexed under pressure and gave way too easily. Beneath it all, beneath what should have been a solid structure, was space. I felt Kelly nervously watching me work. I rinsed again, dried the area, and leaned in with a mirror. The void seemed to taper off somewhere deeper than I could reach, a narrow track disappearing beneath what remained of the root structure. It wasn't a crack, it wasn't decay. It looked, for lack of a better word, eaten. Technically, it was still repairable. The nerve looked untouched, and there was just enough structure left to rebuild on. Nothing a decent lining and fresh composite couldn't shore up, for now. "Let's get the filling kit," I said, sitting back. Kelly peeled off her gloves and went to the supply cupboard. I heard the box tear as she opened it. "They make these things thinner every year," she said, frowning at the mess. "You so much as look at the strip wrong and it bursts." The packaging was flimsy because the supplier was cheap. I'd started ordering from abroad when the budget shrank further. It was from somewhere Eastern European, and half the instructions were printed in a language I couldn't read. We'd been running lean for years. You cut corners where you had to. I worked quickly but carefully, lining the cavity and rebuilding what I could. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold for now. Colin sat up slowly once I was done, stretching his numb jaw. "Give that a day or two to settle," I told him. "If it gives you any more trouble, you know where to find me." He nodded. "Thanks, Doc. We'll keep an eye on it. Don't hesitate to reach out." Kelly stripped off her gloves and started clearing the tray. She waited until Collins had gone before she spoke up, hovering by the sink with a furrowed brow. "What was that?" she asked, quieter now. "I've never seen a tooth come apart like that." "Neither have I said. She rinsed the instrument slower than usual, like she was waiting for me to come up with an answer. "It looked, I don't know, like it had rotted from the inside out." She set the scaler down a little harder than necessary. "Not decay though, was it?" "No," I said, "not decay." She gave a short shake of her head, almost to herself. "Weird one." Kelly wasn't one to push, but I could feel her watching as I rolled my chair back to the computer, waiting for me to tell her it was nothing, or that I'd seen worse, or that I knew exactly what had caused it. When she realized I didn't have an answer, she left to go on a break. With a bit of downtime before my next patient, I opened up my inbox. Claire's emails were still sitting there, flagged in bold. I clicked open the first one. "Hey Dad, I got around to using the stuff you sent. Figured you'd find this funny." I propped up a standing mirror on the kitchen table, wedged the torch between two cookbooks, and angled everything just right so I could see what I was doing. Looked ridiculous, crouched over my own reflection with a filling kit in one hand and a dental probe in the other. I should have taken a picture. You'd either have died laughing or disowned me on the spot. Probably both. It's not perfect, but it's holding. I'm pretty proud of it, if I'm honest. Thought you'd be proud too, considering how I used to cry any time I lost the milk tooth. When I finally make it back home, you'd better have a job waiting for me. Love, Claire. I leaned back in the chair and let myself smile, just for a moment. Then, I clicked open the next email she'd sent earlier. It wasn't like her sending two so close together. Hey Dad, hope you're alright. You've been in my mind lately. I'm starting to think I didn't do the filling properly after all. My jaw's been aching for a few days now, worse than I thought it would be. It's gotten to the point I can't really chew on that side anymore. It feels like the whole tooth's about to fall apart if I press on it too much. I'm pretty sure that wasn't in the instructions, not that I could have read them anyway. It's not just uncomfortable anymore, it's painful. It keeps me up at night sometimes. I know I should get it looked at, but you know me, too stubborn. And if I'm honest, I don't really trust anyone over here to get it right. It makes me nervous just thinking about it. Do you think this is normal? Is this what happens if you mess it up? Or is it something worse? Let me know when you can. Love, Claire. It was in that moment that I became aware of how hard my jaw was throbbing beneath the molar. I pressed my tongue against it without thinking, and I felt it shift. It frightened me to the point where I froze, and I sat very still for a long time. Let the pulse drag out slow and thick through my jaw. Then, energy surged through me, and my fingers moved before I thought about what they were doing. I pulled up records, checking dates, dragging appointments onto the screen one by one. Collins, the girl, me, and then Mrs. Graham, the first to receive one of the new fillings. All of us were patched from the same shipment of cheaper supplies. The knot in my stomach tightened as I scrolled through the invoices, the dates lining up too neatly. Every name, every filling, every order. It sat there in black and white, plain as anything. Every one of them. My jaw throbbed harder, like something was still working its way through bone, patient, slow, chewing its way out. I thought of Mrs. Graham and picked up the phone, pulling up the details from the system. I dialed a number and waited for the tone to connect. Hello, Mrs. Graham? It's David from the surgery. Just a quick call about your recent filling. Nothing to worry about, but we've started running a new patient care initiative that involves follow-up routines for anyone who's had recent work, just making sure everything's settling properly. Oh, she said, sounding a little apprehensive. No charge, of course. We're just trying to catch any small issues early before they turn into anything bigger. That's thoughtful of you. I was actually going to ring. It's been feeling a bit odd since I left. I'd like to have another look, if that's all right. Could you come in later today? We've got a slot open this afternoon. Yes, that's fine. Better to get it checked, isn't it? Exactly. We'll see you then. Mrs. Graham arrived later that afternoon, right on time. We exchanged the usual small talk while I settled her into the chair. Nothing out of the ordinary on the surface. Doesn't quite feel right, that one, she said as I adjusted the light. That's what we're here to check, I said, giving her the practiced, reassuring smile. I called Kelly in from sterilization. She slipped on gloves without question and took up a place at my side. Composite failing again? She asked under her breath. No, just a follow-up, I said. I numbed the area, waited until I was certain Mrs. Graham couldn't feel a thing. Then I worked carefully, easing through the surface of the filling. It crumbled under the burr in soft, unexpected flakes. Beneath it, the dentin looked pale, almost porous, hollow in places. Kelly shifted beside me, leaning in to watch. "Looks the same as Colin's," she said, keeping her voice level. I irrigated the cavity as she suctioned clear the debris. As I leaned closer with the mirror, something small and pale. It was moving. "Kelly," I said quietly, "pass me the Explorer." She did, without comment, though I felt a breath hitch as she saw it too. I nudged the lava free. It was tiny, embedded right where the pulp should have been. Kelly's widened eyes flicked between me and the thing writhing faintly on the tip of my tool. She kept her composure, barely. Mrs. Graham still had her eyes closed, blissfully unaware. "Get the container," I said, steady as I could manage. "Now." "I've never seen anything like that," she whispered as she passed it over. "Neither have I said, placing the lava inside with careful precision, snapping the lid shut before I could shift again. We both sat there for a moment longer than necessary, watching it curl and flex against the plastic. Kelly's gloves creaked faintly as she tightened the grip on the edge of the tray, as if bracing herself against the reality of what we'd just found. My tongue pressed instinctively against my own molar. I felt it again, that faint shift beneath the enamel. The realization settled hard in my chest. Collins, the little girl, Mrs. Graham, Claire, me. I swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of fear crawling up from the back of my throat. Kelly remained speechless, ignorant to the real reason the lava was there. "I need you to head over to Marston's," I said quietly, leaning in close enough that Mrs. Graham wouldn't overhear. "See if they'll sell you a filling pack. Say it's for a rush case. Do whatever you have to." Kelly blinked at me, confused. "We've got more in the vault. Plenty." "I don't want what's in the vault," I said. "Just trust me on this. Go. Beg if needed." Mrs. Graham shifted slightly in the chair, but kept her eyes closed, still numb, still unaware. Kelly hesitated, then gave a single nod, stripping off her gloves as she left. She returned 5 minutes later with a fresh kit in hand, looking relieved and a little flushed. "They didn't ask questions, just happy to take the money," she said. "Didn't even check what I needed it for." "Good," I said. "Let's get it patched up." We worked quickly and cleanly with the new materials. The tooth was lined, filled, and polished to a shine. Mrs. Graham sat up, feeling better than she had when she walked in, and thanked us both politely. "Feels loads better already," she said. "It was worth coming back in." I smiled and sent her on her way. When the door shut behind her, Kelly turned back to me. "All right," she said. "What the hell is going on?" I opened my mouth to answer, but I struggled to find where to start. It was in that moment that I felt a snap in my mouth. It was sharp and sudden, like a tooth was splintering. Kelly's expression shifted from confusion to horror as I lurched forward over the tray, my hand clamped to my jaw like I could hold it in place, stop it somehow. "Open your mouth," Kelly demanded. I obeyed, prying my jaw apart through the pain. Kelly angled the light, leaned in closer, and then recoiled momentarily. Her breath hitched sharply, gloves trembling as she adjusted the mirror. "Oh my God," she said, not calm anymore. "It's moving. I can see it. It's chewed through. It's bigger." I let out a horrified groan, jaw straining open while her hands were still in there. I couldn't speak. All I could do was make that awful sound as the pain sharpened. "Hold still," she snapped. I felt the gnawing scrape inside the tooth, the way the enamel fractured inward as something forced its way out. The pain bloomed, hot and raw beneath the gum. Before I could brace for it, I felt it push, and a crack as it forced its way out through the enamel. Pain blared sharply and deep through my jaw, worse than any abscess I'd ever treated. Kelly grabbed the explorer and, without waiting for me to flinch, hooked it in and pulled. I felt the pressure ease in a rush of warmth and blood. Something white, wet, and writhing slipped free into the tray with a soft, awful sound. We both stared at it. It was another larva, bigger this time, slick with blood and pulp. Kelly looked at me, wide-eyed, her face blanching beneath the harsh surgery light. "Jeez. Oh God," she said, breath catching sharply. "What the hell have we been putting into people's mouths?" I couldn't answer. I turned away, half stumbling to the sink, and threw up. When I finally came back for air, Kelly was still staring at the tray, pale and silent. I wiped my mouth, my hand shaking, and crossed back to the computer. I pulled up the website where I'd placed the order. Refresh again. Nothing. Error screen, page not found. I checked the invoice and grabbed the box from the bin. A phone number was printed in small, pale type beneath the logo. I dialed it. The line rang once, twice, then a dull, automated voice cut through. "The number you have dialed has not been recognized. Please check and try again." I tried twice more. Same message, same dead tone. I sat back, staring at the box, the screen, the number, as if something would change if I looked long enough. There was no trail left to follow. How did they even get listed? How did they pass themselves off as legitimate? The package had looked cheap, yes, but not dangerous. There had been no warnings, no red flags, no reason to question it beyond the usual distrust that came with buying cheap. They sent extras, they'd been polite, efficient. And now, nothing. Half the world away, using the same kit I'd sent, Claire's jaw hurt, with one of those things inside of her teeth, eating away at the enamel from the inside out. I pressed my fingers hard against my temples and felt the pulse through my jaw. And in that moment, I felt utterly helpless. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well and offers opportunities for overtime. After the divorce and the foreclosure, after most of my friends stopped calling, county maintenance was steady enough. Quiet, predictable, and away from the noise from my life I was trying to avoid. I was assigned a new job to do. Take the truck, follow the checklist, tear down the old signs, log the trails as cleared, move on. I was sitting in the diner the morning before the job started, staring into a mug of burnt coffee, pretending not to hear the old men at the corner table watching me. One of them finally spoke up. "Some trails don't want to be forgotten." The others gave a chuckle at that, half serious, half sarcastic. Small-town men with too many years behind them, too familiar with bad stories, too many bad stories told over whiskey and boredom. I gave them the polite nod you learn to use when you're too tired to argue. "They're just signs," I said, "just trees." They didn't argue. They just kept watching me finish my coffee. Truth was, this root landed on my lap because nobody else wanted it. Not the younger guys, not the retirees pulling half shifts to pad their pensions. Even my supervisor didn't look me in the eye when he gave me the paperwork. "A lot of bad breakouts there," he said. "Be careful where you step." I figured it was the usual small-town superstition. Faded trail markers nailed to rotting trees weren't going to bite me. Bureaucracy doesn't scare me. Not usually. The first few trails went by without much to say for themselves. Nothing unusual beyond how quiet everything felt. No birds, no squirrels, not even the hum of flies over deadfall. Just me and the trees, the kind of silence you feel in your teeth. The work itself stayed simple. Hike in, find the markers, pull them down, log the removal, move on. Every sign had a name on it, stamped in wood and weather-worn to hell. Some of them I recognized from old missing persons flyers, faces that used to hang by the register in gas stations when I was a kid, memorials to those lost and never found. Others dated further back than that, names passed down through town gossip, usually mentioned in the same breath as bad luck or sad endings. It struck me more than once how strange it was to name trails after people who'd gone missing on them. Stranger still, how nobody ever bothered to mention that part when handing me the job sheet. After a few days, things started not lining up. I'd clear a path in the morning, haul the markers out, only to find some of them back up by the afternoon. Same trees, same bolts sunk into bark that should have been bare. Then there were the footprints, too narrow for my boots, moving across the paths in places where no one should have been walking. They never led anywhere, just stopped dead in the middle of thick brush or vanished outright on solid ground. The radio gave me more static the deeper I went. Voices sometimes, faint and broken beneath the white noise. I couldn't make out much at first, but after a while it got clearer. Stop, turn back, leave it alone. Always urgent, always on the edge of words. I told myself it had to be locals playing games, teens tapping into my radio frequency. Maybe those old boys at the diner still had enough spite in them to plant a CB somewhere and mess with me. I thought about packing up early, taking the write-up, losing the overtime. But rent was due, bills were stacked, and I couldn't stomach screwing up another job. So I stayed, set up camp right in the thick of it to finish quicker. One more night, then I'd tear down the last of it and never look back. Even as I hammered in the last stake and zipped my tent shut beneath those dead trees, I couldn't shake the feeling I should have left already. That night, the woods didn't pretend to sleep. I heard movement outside the tent long before I unzipped it. Not footsteps exactly, not anything that steady. Branches snapped, leaves shifted, and something mimicked the short, clipped beeps of my radio. Not words, just noise, chopped and mechanical, trying to get the rhythm right without understanding the purpose behind it. I sat in the dark, listening, waiting for it to stop. When it didn't, I stepped out with my flashlight and swept the trees beyond the camp. For a second, I thought I saw a figure. It was tall, bigger than anyone living ought to be, standing too still between the trunks. My light didn't catch it properly, and when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it had been a tree, a shadow, or a grazing animal I had spooked away. When I tried the radio again, the static gave way to words. Not sentences, nothing conversational. Just names. Names of trails I hadn't reached yet, names pulled straight from my paperwork. Some I didn't even recognize. I didn't sleep after that. By morning, every marker I had pulled the day before had been reinstalled, not where I'd found them originally, but deeper into the woods, trees I hadn't walked past yet. Some even looked freshly mounted, bolts driven into the bark that wept clean sap beneath them. I packed up camp and made for the truck, ready to leave this evolving nightmare behind, only to find it wasn't where I left it. The tire tracks stretched off into the brush and vanished without a sign of turning around. I stood there for a long while, fighting the urge to just walk back to town and leave it all behind. But the job was halfway done. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and I couldn't stomach another mistake on my record. I just needed to finish off the last of my assigned route. So I kept going. I was going to finish clearing these trails. Nothing in those woods connected the way it should. Paths I knew for a fact ran east to west began curving in on themselves, leading me back to places I hadn't passed twice. I checked my compass until the needle spun in slow, lazy circles no matter which way I turned. The GPS on my phone glitched between error screens and coordinates that made no sense. I started leaving fresh markers behind me, bright tape, scratches in the bark, small cairns of stone. Every time I circled back, they were gone. The discarded pile of signs I created to dispose of later that morning vanished too. I kept walking until the trees opened into a clearing I didn't remember from any map. At its center stood a structure. Not natural, not accidental. A totem of old signs, rusted and rotted, deliberately bolted together in twisting layers. Beneath the plaques hung scraps of fabric, torn backpacks and empty shoes, bones wedged between them, yellowed thin with age. I recognized a few of the names on those signs from the markers I'd pulled, names from my paperwork, names from missing persons cases decades old. The trees around the clearing weren't untouched either. Deep grooves cut into the bark, long slashes that pulled at the wood in crude shapes. At first, they looked random, but the longer I stared, the more they resembled the clean, square fonts used on county trail markers, letters half-formed, sentences left unfinished. This wasn't some prank. This wasn't locals trying to scare me off or some bitter old men with a CB radio in the woods. The trails weren't just abandoned. They weren't meant to be touched. The woods were watching. Or worse, waiting. I tried to backtrack. I tried to follow the map, my own markers, even the sun. None of it lined up anymore. In the end, I went back to the clearing, back to the totem. I thought if I burned it, maybe it would break whatever was holding me here. Maybe fire would undo it, strip it down to something human again. The flames caught easily enough, but they burned blue, green at the edges, curling smoke up in heavy spirals that didn't rise but hung low and thick over the ground. That was when the woods reacted. The wind roared through the trees in sharp bursts, pulling at the branches until they bowed and twisted. The ground trembled beneath my feet. I heard something creak in the dark beyond the clearing, timber straining, metal grinding against itself. The totem didn't burn. Not really. The signs blackened, peeled, fell apart, only to pull themselves together again. Bent metal reformed, plaques twisting into new shapes, names rearranging themselves into words I couldn't read. The whole thing shifted, taller now, branches splitting off its core like limbs. Something stepped free of it. I couldn't tell where the structure ended and the thing began. Wood for bones, rusted signs for skin, nailed plaques overlapping like scales, limbs too long, torso hollowed out, a shape made of all the pieces I thought I had removed. Signs hung from its body, clattering against each other with every slow, deliberate movement. Words I recognized, names I had touched, dates I had logged. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The weight of its gaze pressed into me, pulling something loose behind my eyes. Branches scraping against one another until they sounded almost like laughter, dry and joyless. I turned to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Paths folded in on themselves, roots broke through the dirt in coils thick enough to trip me no matter which way I turned. Daylight snapped to dusk without warning, shadows stretching long and thin until they swallowed the edges of the clearing. The thing watched me until I couldn't hold onto the moment any longer. The ground tilted, the air split sideways, my thoughts scattered into static. I blacked out standing right where it wanted me. I woke up lying in the dirt, but it wasn't the same dirt I'd blacked out on. The ground beneath me was clean, the trail well maintained. Fresh gravel crunched under my hands when I pushed myself upright. The trees weren't dead and twisting anymore. They stood tall and green, leaves shifting gently in a breeze that actually smelled right. I could hear birds again, wind in the branches. For a moment, I let myself believe I'd made it out. Maybe I'd wandered too far, passed out, and someone had dragged me back to a safe route. But my truck was gone. No sign of my tent, my tools, the clearing, or twisted thing I'd seen pull itself together from bones and metal. I turned in a slow circle, trying to find any marker to orient myself. Nothing. Only a trail running ahead and behind, so neat and orderly it might have been laid down yesterday. I followed it backward, hoping it might lead to a road. Instead, it brought me to a sign, new, freshly bolted, standing proud at the trailhead. The words didn't make sense until I read them twice. It was a new trail, one I hadn't seen when I took inventory of the listed trails for the area. Named after me. The established date was the day I had blacked out. There was no way someone could have made a whole trail in that short a time. It would have taken a whole team weeks. Yet, here it was, freshly laid and ready for use. I stood there, staring, until my throat closed up. The font matched every sign I'd removed over the past week. Same materials, same bolts. Even the angle of the placement was the same as the ones I'd pulled down with my own hands. I remembered, clear as daylight, how every one of those old trails bore the name of a missing person. Names I thought were just bureaucratic leftovers from decades past. Memorials to those lost to nature, forgotten names I thought I was helping erase. But I wasn't clearing them. I was making room. This was how new trails got built. Not laid by county workers, not signed off with permits or blueprints. People didn't vanish here. They got repurposed. I kept walking because I didn't know what else to do. The trail stretched ahead, perfect and clean beneath my feet. No rot, no traps, no wrong turns. Just a neat little path inviting people in. Up ahead, I saw them. Hikers, 3 of them, maybe 4. Bright jackets, backpacks, chatting as they made their way down the trail like nothing was wrong. Laughing, relaxed, without a clue what waited further in. I shouted for them to stop. I waved my arms, stepped into their path, anything to get their attention. They didn't react. They didn't even glance up. I screamed at them, begged them to turn around, told them they had no idea what they were walking toward, that this trail wasn't meant to exist, that it would swallow them like it swallowed me. They walked through me. Not around, not past. Through. Cold sliced through my ribs and chest, a chill deeper than winter, leaving nothing behind but air. They didn't hesitate, didn't seem to notice at all. I chased after them, still shouting, still trying to get between them and the woods ahead. No matter what I did, they didn't hear. My words didn't touch them. My hands couldn't stop them. I stepped off the trail, hoping maybe that would break whatever held me here. The world twisted, trees folded inward, colors drained to ash and bone. I blinked and found myself back on the path where I had started. I tried again. Same result every time. The trail wouldn't let me leave. I could only watch as the hikers moved ahead until they left the confines of where my limits were, unaware that deeper in, something was possibly waiting to fold them into the earth the same way it folded me. I wanted to follow them, make sure they were safe, but I couldn't even touch them. All I could do was watch, helpless, voiceless, bound to this path. Time stopped making sense after a while. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I didn't even get tired. My body didn't ache, my feet never blistered, but I couldn't leave the trail. I tried every direction, every hour of what I could only guess was passing time. Off the trail, the world broke apart and threw me back onto the gravel. I couldn't rest. I just walked, back and forth, from the trailhead bearing my name to the furthest point before the woods bent the world in half again, back and forth forever. People came, not often, but enough. Hikers in pairs or groups wandering in without a clue, following my name printed on that clean, fresh sign. I followed them at a distance, watched them finish the path, heard them laugh about the beautiful scenery, the quiet woods. They always made it through, at least the ones I saw. They always left. I couldn't follow beyond the trailhead. I wanted to think I was watching over them. Some part of me still wanted to protect someone from this place. I told myself maybe that mattered. Maybe I still mattered. Then came the ranger. A county man, clipboard in hand, maintenance vest, same patch on his sleeve I used to wear, same paperwork I'd filled out, the checklist, the inventory, same job. He stood beneath my sign for a long time, scowling at it. Eventually, he pulled out a crowbar and started prying it loose. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to leave it, to get back in his truck and drive until he couldn't see trees anymore. I followed him as he walked down the trail, dragging the sign under one arm. I screamed as loud as I could, then pushed harder to try get through to him. Nothing happened until his radio crackled at his hip. My voice came through it, warped and broken, barely words at all. A handful of syllables, a warning he couldn't hear. Or maybe he could, and simply dismissed it as the locals driving him away. Ahead of him, between the trees, I saw it. The thing from the clearing, the shape stitched together from rusted signs and bones, from wood and stolen names. It moved ahead of him, slow but certain, always just out of sight. It wasn't chasing him. It didn't have to. It was leading him somewhere. He didn't see it. He wouldn't have believed it if he did. He followed his paperwork, his duty, not knowing what was waiting for him now that he had disturbed the trail. They stepped off the trail together into the woods beyond where I could go. I stood there, watching the space where they vanished, listening to the empty woods breathe. The sign would come back, I knew. New name, new date, new path carved deeper, another piece added to the forest's collection, another mile for hikers to follow, another man swallowed up, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. People always imagine surveyors working in the mountains or along beautiful stretches of coastline, standing nobly against the horizon with a tripod and scope. The truth is, most of the time, we're standing alone in a field that doesn't deserve anyone's attention. Empty, sun-bleached, littered with scrap metal or half-dead hedgerows choking in plastic bags. Places waiting to become something else. That morning was no different. A wide, flat stretch of land on the outskirts of a dead-end town, the kind of site where the council had already approved development before anyone bothered sending me to check for subsurface problems. You'd think if they were serious about health and safety, they'd prioritize this step earlier. But half my work comes down to ticking boxes after decisions have been made. I parked my truck on the edge of the field, grabbed my gear, and hiked out into the waist-high grass with my boots soaking up yesterday's rain. Usual checklist: boundary confirmation, soil composition, utilities, elevation consistency. My kit was standard: a total station for accuracy, a handheld GNSS receiver, and the ground-penetrating radar to check beneath the surface. Expensive tools treated better than my own health. I logged everything methodically. That's how I worked. I follow process, keep my paperwork tight, never cut corners, even when I know it won't matter to anyone but me. The first couple of hours passed like they always did. Slow, methodical, solitary. I made my passes, marking coordinates, noting anomalies. There were a few small inconsistencies right off. My compass readings jittered by a few degrees more than they should have, and the GNSS had a tendency to flicker, struggling to keep a solid fix on satellite locks. That happens sometimes near old landfill sites, or when there's a high iron content in the soil, though the maps didn't show anything to suggest it here. Still, it bothered me. I hate noise in my data. It nags at me. Some surveyors fudge through and write it off as margin of error. I'm not wired like that. I don't like unresolved questions sitting in my reports. I made another loop around the perimeter, double-checking points I'd already marked. That's when I noticed it. Something ahead, near the center of the field. Something tall enough to break through the monotony of the grass. Something that hadn't been there when I walked this stretch an hour ago. At first glance, it appeared to be utility infrastructure, possibly a temporary rig for which paperwork had been forgotten. I moved closer, but my chest tightened with a low, creeping sense that this wasn't right. It wasn't a cabinet or a drill rig or any kind of construction I'd seen before. It was an elevator. Freestanding, about 8 feet tall, twin doors, a control panel fixed beside them with a single backlit button glowing steady green. No markings, no company logos, no rust or grime. It looked brand new. modern, powered. I walked a slow circle around it, half expecting to find scaffolding or a generator or even loose cables snaking out of the grass. Nothing. The thing was planted into the earth, rooted like a permanent structure, but the ground around it was undisturbed. No tire tracks, no footprints except my own, no sign of heavy equipment having moved through. If something had planted this here, they'd done it without disturbing a single inch of soil. And that was impossible. Things don't just appear fully installed without a trace. That wasn't possible. I pulled out my phone, flipped through the site reports again just to be sure. Nothing listed. No prior development, no underground facilities, nothing built or planned until this survey was complete. The last formal record of this land showed farmland subdivided and sold off decades ago, before elevators like this even existed. Still, there it was. I circled the elevator slowly, taking it in from every angle. Up close, it looked even stranger than it had from a distance. The surface was brushed steel, like the kind you'd expect to see in an old office block or hospital, clean enough to show a dull reflection of my boots in the lower panels. No signs of age or weather damage, despite the rain that had come the day before. The seams between the doors were sharp and precise. The button panel beside it hummed with quiet power, a single green light steady beside the down arrow. There wasn't a scratch on it. It made no sense. Modern elevator systems require power, maintenance shafts, connection to something. Yet, here it was, humming quietly in the middle of nowhere. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself there had to be a reason. Maybe someone had started illegal development without permits. Maybe there was a corporate project buried beneath me, one they'd gone to a lot of trouble to hide. If so, my job wasn't just to take soil samples and boundary readings anymore. Part of surveying is reporting anomalies. Unauthorized construction had to be documented. That thought settled the debate for me. Curiosity played its part, sure, but this wasn't about curiosity anymore. This was about liability, about making sure the people who came after me didn't stumble into something dangerous because I hadn't done my due diligence. I stepped up to the doors and rested my finger on the call button again. I pressed it. I don't really know what I expected to happen when I pressed the button. Maybe nothing. Maybe for the light to flicker out and remind me that what I was looking at couldn't possibly be real. What I didn't expect was for the elevator to answer. With a low hum and a faint tremor beneath my boots, the machinery kicked into life. Somewhere below, cables tightened, gears turned, and the elevator rose smooth into place. The doors opened without hesitation, revealing a clean, empty car waiting for me. The interior smelled faintly metallic, the sterile scent of something mechanical and unused. I stepped forward, just far enough to study the panel inside. The floor selection was simple. Ground level marked as G. Below that, floors labelled -1 through -7. Only the first basement level was lit. The button glowed steadily and palely, inviting me down. For a moment I stood there, weighing it in my mind. This wasn't standard procedure. No one would expect me to step into an elevator in the middle of a field, and no one would question me if I flagged it in the report and walked away. But what if there was something down there, some illegal structure, a liability hidden beneath the earth? Unauthorized builds aren't exactly well known for their amazing structural integrity. If I left it unchecked and something happened later, it would come back on me. Part of this job is making sure the ground is safe before others build on it. That responsibility doesn't just stop because something feels wrong. One floor. That was all. I could take a quick look and confirm it was an old maintenance space or something more recent. Just one level to investigate. Standard due diligence. I stepped inside, pressed the button for -1, and felt the car lurch gently as it began to sink into the earth. The car juddered as it reached its stop. The door slid open, and for a moment I thought I stepped into a time capsule. The floor stretched out ahead in grim, flickering light, lined with sagging cubicle walls and peeling linoleum tiles. Exposed concrete framed the ceiling where aging fluorescent strips hummed without pattern, casting intermittent shadows across the space. It felt abandoned, not ruined, not collapsed, just left, as though everyone had walked out at once and never returned. I moved forward, cautiously. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and stale paper. My boots echoed against the floor, drawing attention to the silence that pressed in from every side. A small break room sat off to my left, its glass panels smeared with grease and handprints so faded that they looked fossilized. Inside, chairs were pulled out as if waiting for people to return. On one table sat a styrofoam cup, half full. The coffee inside had grown a film of scum. The cigarette burned in an ashtray nearby, smoke still lifting in a lazy spiral. I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no power to this place, no feed connected it to the surface grid, and no generator noise hummed behind the walls. My scanner confirmed it. 0 utilities, 0 heat signatures. And yet, here it was. Lights on, smoke rising, something half-drunk sitting warm in a cup. I moved further in, examining a row of desks. Paperwork littered them, yellowed with age but still legible. Maintenance logs, requisition orders for supplies, mundane office debris from a company that didn't exist on any records I'd been given. One memo caught my eye more than the rest. It was stapled to a corkboard in the corner of the room. Strict protocol. No unauthorized personnel permitted below level 3 under any circumstances. Maintenance team reports must be signed off on prior to departure. Another sign, more official, more permanent, showed a cartoon worker in a hard hat giving a thumbs up under bold red text. Always follow maintenance protocols below level 3. I felt the first twist of unease in my chest. This wasn't some abandoned structure forgotten by paperwork. This was built deliberately, organized, planned for depths the surface had no record of. I returned to the elevator faster than I intended. My finger went straight to the ground floor button. I pressed it, waited, pressed it again harder. The button remained dark beneath my thumb. No response. I tried holding it down, willing the doors to close. Nothing happened. I stepped back, heart climbing higher in my throat. I wasn't stuck, not yet. Maybe the elevator system was wired to operate sequentially. That would make sense if this was an old security protocol, restricting access one level at a time until clearance was confirmed. The only button lit now was for -2. I checked my phone for a dash of hope, but of course, no signal. One floor at a time, no other path forward. That was the logic I grabbed onto, the reasoning that kept me from losing my nerve. If I wanted to get back to the surface, I'd have to reach the bottom and hope the controls reset. That was how these things worked, wasn't it? If it wasn't, pretending made it easier to calm down. The doors closed without my touch. The button for -2 glowed steadily, and the elevator began to descend again. I braced myself. Whatever was down there, I'd see it soon enough. When the doors opened again, I thought for a moment that the elevator had broken entirely. This couldn't be another floor beneath the corporate basement. This couldn't belong underground at all. I stepped out into what looked like a house. A complete, fully furnished suburban home, the kind built in the 90s with wood paneling and patterned wallpaper that hadn't aged well. A lamp hummed softly in the corner. Yellowed blinds flitted pale light onto carpet worn down to the threads. Somewhere, a clock ticked steadily. The air smelled faintly of burnt toast and old cleaning products. It was the smell of someone's daily routine, long since abandoned, but somehow still hanging on. I walked forward, drawn through a narrow hallway into a living room that could have belonged to any tired suburban family from 30 years ago. Framed photographs lined the mantel. I picked one up, turned it toward me. My breath caught. It looked like an inane family portrait, the posing of an idealistic nuclear family. But the more I stared, the stranger it got. I wasn't sure if it started normally or was shifting so slowly it was imperceptible, but the faces held uncanny features. Eyes slightly shifted, smiles that didn't hold an ounce of happiness. All of it culminated in my gut, sinking each second I studied it. I put it away, hoping it was a one-off, and looked through others, hoping one would hold a clue as to where I was. But each had the same effect. My stomach feeling acidic from the stress. Nothing bad happened, but my body felt like it had a near-death experience simply from standing in one spot. I couldn't help but move on. I checked my phone. No service, no time displayed on the lock screen. The battery icon remained frozen at 82%. For a moment, I stood in the middle of that room and listened. Somewhere in the house, water dripped slowly, a rhythmic patter that echoed through unseen pipes. Beyond the windows, nothing but raw concrete pressed against the glass. No hint of anything existing beyond the walls, just blank grey, featureless and absolute. There were no doors leading out, no stairs going up or down, only hallways that curved around into the same rooms again, looping quietly, as if this space existed in fragments, repeating themselves over and over. I found myself back where I started without realizing how I had gotten there. The elevator stood open, waiting, its soft interior light the only thing breaking the dimness. The ground floor button still remained dark. Only -3 now glowed, as if daring me to press it. I hesitated. Nothing here had threatened me. Nothing had tried to keep me. Yet the weight of something unseen pressed deeper into my chest. This place wasn't dangerous. Not yet. But it wasn't meant to be found. I stepped back inside. The doors closed, and I felt the drop begin again. The doors opened onto a corridor tiled in an institutional pale blue, meant to calm nerves but rarely succeeding. The walls were clean in places, peeling in others. The lights overhead buzzed inconsistently, casting uneven strips of cold fluorescent across the floor. I recognized the smell immediately. Antiseptic, old metal, something faintly chemical beneath it all. A hospital, or something built to resemble one. I moved forward slowly, stepping past abandoned gurneys and carts of surgical tools laid out in neat, untouched rows. Through a set of swinging doors, I found the operating theatre. A large observation window loomed above it, glass cracked in several places. Below, the room held the chaos of an interrupted procedure. A body rested on the table beneath a circle of bright surgical lamps. Blood crusted the sheets beneath it, though the edges glistened wet under the harsh light. Tubes still fed clear liquid through hanging IV bags, the fluid running with a slow, steady drip despite no one watching. Metal trays held bone saws, scalpels and rib spreaders, all laid out with the precision of professionals who had no intention of cleaning up after themselves. I approached the table. The body was covered from the neck down, but even under the sheet, I could see the wrongness of its shape. Too thin in some places, too bloated in others, limbs bent at angles that didn't match how bone should move. Beside the table, a clipboard hung from a rail. I flipped through the patient files without thinking, scanning lines of text my brain struggled to process. Different dates, different injuries, gunshot wounds, blunt force trauma, surgical extraction, organ failure, brain death. Some of them couldn't be possible. One listed dissection while still alive, another marked the procedure as completed despite a date that hadn't happened yet. Something shifted behind the far curtain. I froze. The movement was slow, steady, a shadow pressed against the fabric, a shape too tall to be human, too thin to belong in this world. The curtain rippled as it moved behind it, tracing a careful, deliberate path along the wall. The surgical lamps flickered overhead. One by one, they blinked out, plunging parts of the room into uneven darkness. Footsteps echoed across the tile, soft at first, then louder, coming from more than one direction. I couldn't see anything in the corners of the room where the light had died, but I could hear breath rasping from somewhere close, heavy and wet. I didn't wait to see what would step through the curtain. I backed toward the elevator, my hands shaking as I reached for the button. The doors opened faster than I expected. I stepped inside and slammed my palm against the panel. Only -4 was lit now. The doors closed before the footsteps could reach me, and I felt the car sink lower into the earth. Out of habit, I reviewed what had just happened. Each floor before had been empty. Unsettling, but empty. I had grown complacent that this strange structure were just glimpses into a maddened mind, that nothing would manifest. But I was proven wrong, and I feared what the rest of the floors held. When the doors opened again, the smell hit me first. Stagnant water mixed with mildew and something acrid beneath it all. The light overhead flickered weakly, revealing tiled floors that were lost beneath a layer of black water which rippled with slow, unnatural motion. I wanted to just stay in the elevator car and wait for the next button to light up, but no matter how long I stood there, frozen by mental exhaustion, none of the buttons lit up. I was forced to move forward. I stepped out and felt the chill soak through my boots. The water reached my calves, thick and oily enough to leave a sheen on my skin. I stood in what once had been a shopping mall. Storefronts lined the wide corridor, the neon signs burned out or replaced with names that made my head ache to read. Clothing displays featured rows of shirts and jackets I recognized from my own closet, but the cuts were off, and the colors bled together where the seams met. Every logo looked almost correct, but shifted when I tried to focus on the details. Mannequins filled the stores and hallways, half submerged, their blank faces aimed toward the water's surface. Some bobbled gently, as if breathing beneath the black depths, though it could have just been the ebb and flow of the water. Others leaned against the glass walls, hands pressed flat as if trying to force their way out. I moved carefully between them, watching their stillness for any sign of change. One blinked as I passed, another turned its head just enough for me to catch the movement from the corner of my eye. The light above hummed louder, casting the water in a dull, sickly glow. As I glanced down, my reflection stared back. Not just stared, moved. It looked like a second version of me beneath the water, watching with calm indifference. When I stepped forward, it stayed still until it shifted fast through the water, no longer overlapping with my reflection, an off-white blur moving through the water. Another mannequin. The water never settled from when it moved. Something was happening. The water began to rise. I could feel the pull against my legs, dragging me down inch by inch. Shelves and signage shifted with groaning protests, sucked towards some unseen drain beneath the floor. Beneath the noise, something moved faster now, circling me, unseen but close enough to disturb the mannequins as it passed. They bobbed in its wake, heads dipping below the surface one by one. I turned toward the elevator, forcing myself through the thickened current. The water clawed at my legs. Every step felt heavier than the last. The mannequin that had blinked now floated face down in front of me, blocking my path. I shoved past it without looking back. The elevator waited, doors open, light spilling onto the water's black surface. I pushed forward with everything I had left. Something brushed against my ankle. I didn't look down. I threw myself into the elevator just as the water surged higher, slapping against the threshold with enough force to splash across the floor. My hand hit the panel in blind desperation, fingers smearing wet across the buttons, until one responded beneath my palm. I didn't even see which one it was until the doors groaned shut, sealing the dark water outside with a hollow, metallic thud. Something heavy struck the doors from the other side. Not fists, not hands. Something deeper, something slower. The whole car trembled beneath the impact. I pressed my back into the corner as the water drained from the elevator car, chest heaving, soaked through and shivering. My eyes found the panel on instinct. -6 was lit now, steady and silent, waiting to take me further down. I felt my stomach twist. For a few seconds, I thought about the situation I was in. Each time, moving on threw me into more peril, but staying was a death sentence. It felt like a choice of a fast death or a death of 1,000 cuts. Each descent was closer to whatever waited at the bottom. But there wasn't a choice. The ground floor wasn't coming back. This elevator only moved in one direction. The elevator opened into darkness. Not the kind of shadow that comes from a power outage, but real, endless black, stretching high above a canopy of silent trees. It wasn't a room. It wasn't even an illusion of a room. It was a forest. The air was cold, damp with pine and rot. Dirt crunched underfoot. Damp leaves clung to my boots. A full forest planted beneath the earth. No walls, no horizon, no stars. I stepped out slowly, flashlight sweeping across tangled branches and leaning trunks. The beam felt thinner than before, weaker. The darkness swallowed everything beyond a few steps ahead. I knew this place. Not exactly, not the details, but the shape of it. The way the trees leaned in too close, the way the trails led nowhere or looped. I had dreamed this place as a kid, over and over again. Always this forest, always this sky, pitch black with no stars. Something had pulled it from the back of my mind and made it real. Somewhere far off, I heard something move. Not a loud crash, just the soft drag of something tall brushing through the undergrowth. I didn't call out, didn't even whisper. I just moved forward, one step at a time, toward a trail barely wide enough for me to pass. Branches clawed at my arms and face. No wind, no birds, just that steady, distant shifting, always behind the trees, always out of sight. I found signs of others. A half-buried compass with a casing cracked open, a metal clipboard snapped in half, a surveyor's pole leaning against the tree, snapped at the base, a crushed water bottle still sealed, still full. Whatever had been here before me hadn't lasted long. The path narrowed, the trees got thicker. My flashlight caught movement just beyond reach. Something thin, impossibly tall, watching, never closer, never retreating, always in the corner of my eye. Then it moved. No sound, no warning. It blurred through the trees straight toward me. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots snagged my ankles. I didn't care. I sprinted through the black, lungs burning, flashlight swinging wildly. Then, something touched me. Just for a second, cold fingers brushed the back of my neck. I dropped the flashlight, dove forward, and rolled into a clearing. No trees, no walls, just a pair of metal elevator doors standing upright in the dirt with no shaft, no structure to hold them. They opened. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I ran through them and hit the panel. As the doors began to close, I saw it again. A figure, impossibly tall, almost human but stretched wrong, watching from the tree line. Then the door sealed, and the button for -7 lit up. I leaned back, trying to catch my breath. My neck still burned where it had touched me. Not a cut, not a bruise, but something had left a part of itself there. And I was taking it with me to the final floor. The descent to -7 felt longer than the others. The elevator groaned through the shaft, each passing second stretching my nerves tighter. I closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing. It wasn't working. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out, like it already knew I wasn't making it back to the surface. I couldn't shake the thought that I had already passed the point where people stop escaping places like this, Whatever rules I thought I understood when I stepped into the elevator didn't matter anymore. Each floor hadn't just been stranger than the last, they'd been an escalating threat. By the time the doors opened again, I was prepared to see hell itself waiting. What greeted me instead was silence. Silence wrapped in dust and concrete. I didn't step far from the elevator at first. My instinct told me to turn around, press whatever button would bring me back up, and never come down again. I hadn't trusted this place from the start, but now it felt worse than a mistake. It felt final. I turned back and pressed the ground level button. Nothing happened. I hit it again, this time harder. I jabbed every button on the panel, one after the other. If I couldn't get back to the surface, I felt the other floors would be safer than this one. Any of them. G stayed dark. The numbers below -1 gave no reaction at all. Only -7 glowed steady and silent. I waited, hoping the doors might shut on their own, that the car might pull me out of here without asking permission. The doors stayed open. The lights inside the car flickered once, then dimmed. I stepped back, breathing hard. My throat felt tight, as if the air down here had thickened the longer I stood in it. I knew, without needing to say it out loud, that this elevator wasn't going to take me anywhere. Not anymore. Not until it wanted to. If I wanted to leave, I wasn't going back the way I came. That thought crawled under my skin and settled in the pit of my stomach. My only way forward meant stepping deeper into the floor that would surely kill me, into whatever waited. I stepped out into a vast cavern of unfinished construction. Poured concrete stretched in every direction, cracked and splintered where support beams stood half embedded into the ceiling. Scaffolding loomed in twisted sections, some bolted upright, others collapsed in tangled heaps. Tower lights stood in clusters, but none of them worked. Pale bulbs hung dead and cold. The only illumination came from the elevator itself and a few scattered work lamps running on a circuit I couldn't see. My boots crunched across grit and broken tile. Tools lay abandoned across the floor. No brands, no markings, just shapes worn smooth from use. A sledgehammer, bolt cutters, coils of wire. None of it belonged to any company I'd ever heard of. Blueprints littered a drafting table near the center of the space, pinned beneath rusted clamps. I glanced down and felt my stomach turn. The designs weren't possible. Stairwells that curved into themselves, doors without hinges, rooms connected in ways geometry shouldn't allow. One diagram showed a space labeled Habitation Unit, but there were no entrances drawn, no exits either. Another detail called the Observation Chamber, Stage 3, where dozens of small circles crowded the corners, each labelled as a camera. The space itself consisted of a single chair bolted to the centre. I flipped through more pages. The plans grew worse. One room bore no markings except the title scrawled in handwriting that looked rush. Your replacement. Another blueprint detailed a pit described only as depth unknown, but showed bones layered through the black beneath it, spreading outward in impossible spirals. My throat tightened. I understood now. I had been moving towards something by design. Not a mistake, not an accident. A process. This wasn't a ruin or a forgotten place. This was construction in progress. Tailored, evolving, unfinished only because whoever built it hadn't yet decided how to finish me or whoever this place was designed for. I moved carefully. Even half-built, this place wasn't safe. Gaps in the floor dropped into black voids that seemed to have no end. Rebar jutted from concrete at angles sharp enough to impale. Scaffolding leaned at unstable slants. One wrong step and I would vanish into the dark beneath. More than once, I thought I heard movement above me, something scraping across the girders. I refused to look up. The sense of being watched grew heavier with every step. Lights flickered where none should have worked, illuminating paths I hadn't seen before, then vanishing the second I turned away. The labyrinth rearranged itself, I was sure of it. Hallways ended where they shouldn't, walls appeared where gaps had been moments earlier. Through it all, I kept moving. I had to. Standing still felt worse than any danger I could see. I found a service elevator tucked into a corner where no structure should have allowed space for it, smaller than the other, older. Manual controls behind a grated door that groaned as I pulled it open. One button labelled "To Surface" in worn metal letters. For a moment, I hesitated. Relief warred with dread. I understood what this place had been built to become. If it had been finished, there wouldn't have been a door waiting for me at all. There would have been a pit, a chair, a box with my name on it. And I couldn't help but wonder if this tiny glimpse of hope was another test to fail. But I had no other choice. I pulled the lever. The elevator shuddered into motion, rising with agonizing slowness. As the construction site fell away beneath me, I didn't feel safe. I felt lucky. Luck was thin protection. But for now, it would have to be enough. When the service elevator doors opened, I stepped out into silence. The air felt colder than it had when I arrived. The wind moved through the grass with a soft rustle, empty of any sound but nature and my breathing. No buildings, no elevator shaft rising from the dirt. Just the field, empty and ordinary, stretching out under a sky too grey to tell time by. I stood there for a long time, unable to move. My boots sank slightly into the soft earth, and I let them. I let everything go slack. My hands, my thoughts, my fear. It was drained out of me in waves, leaving behind a numbness that felt worse in its own way. The gear I had carried down was gone. The clipboard I had clutched through every descent hung limp at my side. My paperwork was still blank. I could not write down what had happened because I did not know how to explain it, even to myself. For a moment, I believed I had imagined it all, that some exhaustion or sickness had cracked open a space in my mind and let this happen inside it, that I had never gone down, never found those rooms waiting beneath me, that I would walk back to the truck and drive home and forget. Then I heard it. Ding! The sound cut through the silence, clean and sharp. I turned toward where the elevator had been, expecting to see nothing. A mechanical groan followed, cables pulling taut beneath the soil that showed no sign of disturbance. The car I had just emerged from was slowly descending back down, the sound of weight moving downward, pulled deeper into something unseen. For a heartbeat, I told myself it was automatic, a failsafe returning the car to its resting point. But another thought crawled into my chest and rooted there. What if something had called it back down? And if so, was it coming back up? I didn't wait to find out. The spell broke and my legs moved before my mind caught up. I walked fast, then faster, pushing through the grass until I saw my truck waiting untouched at the edge of the field. I climbed inside, slammed the door shut, and gripped the wheel until my knuckles burned white. The clipboard lay in the passenger seat, paperwork blank. It would stay that way. I could not explain this. Not to my boss, not to myself, not to anyone. Out in the field, the wind kept blowing. I sat behind the glass, staring at the empty place where the elevator had been, waiting for the sound of it returning to pull me under all over again. And after a breath, I left.